Thank you everyone for being here. Our next speaker is Kip Reddick, and he is from Christopher Newport University, and he's going to be speaking today about eliminating anesthetics and awakening presence. Thank you, Kip.
All right.
And would you like to have a verbal or a visual 5-minute warning?
You can do a verbal, although I timed it, it should be okay. All right. As long as I don't pause too much, right? Okay, so I'm going to try to do this screen share thing again. Share. There. And do you guys see the fire there?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
All right, so here goes. Dancing as a ritual practice in indigenous cultures evokes presence. The dancers come together, sometimes joining hands and forming a circle. In religious ritual, their encounter includes a communication with sacred reality. These dances involve fully embodied action, the employment of all senses. The dancing circle in ancient Greek culture, the orchestra, is the place of encounter, the place of presence. The transformation of space into sacred place, the manifestation of presence, begins as the people form a circle, maybe around a fire in the center of their habitat. Their embodiment is felt as they enter the space that will become the orchestra. Someone starts beating on a log. Its rhythmic drumming resounds as waves of bass tones move across the space. Sound resonates with the constituents of the surround. Hands touching hands, feet on earth, the encounter unfolds tactily. The aroma of the fire and human bodies fills the dancing place, the orchestra. Presence saturates the place, making itself felt, spilling out in their emotion. Marshall McLuhan refers to an interplay of sense ratios and calls attention to the way some cultures rely on a particular dominating sense and thereby reduce the others. A technological dilation or externalization of one or another sense causes a new ratio of senses and a surprising new world, which evokes a vigorous new closure, a novel pattern of interplay among all of the senses together. End of quote. He goes on to write, quote, one example is that the phonetic alphabet made a break between eye and ear, between semantic meaning and visual code, end of quote, shifting culture from tribal to civilized. The downside, he notes, is that most civilized people are crude and numb in their perceptions compared with the hyperesthesia of oral and auditory cultures. This anesthetic, a dilation of sight and reduction of other senses, happened in ancient Greek culture and can be understood through the evolution of Greek drama. Jane Ellen Harrison claims that the dithram of the Dionysian ritual, which gave birth to Greek drama, comes from a common human impulse to recreate emotion, a concretization of emotion performed in a religious ritual. The ritual dance, in Greek, the dromenon, literally the thing done, is, according to Harrison, an action resulting from the desire to bring life back from death. At this point, emotion flows out of the dance, a representation that presences the desire. Harrison holds that we don't just receive an impulse, but react to it, and in so doing, perform the action, the dromenon, the ritual dance in this case. Drama, writes Harrison, is the cousin of dromenon. At some point in the history of this ritual, the majority of those gathered stopped dancing and sat, allowing representatives to dance. The representatives become the chorus. Harrison writes that the chorus in drama is a ritual form still surviving after the ritual has been transformed into art. Through the art form, the division of performers and audience initiates an end to hyperesthesia through the anesthesia of the audience, the dilation of sight and a reduction of other senses. The shift from all persons participating in the dance, a hyperesthetic encounter where all become fully present, worshiping and acting, to spectators anesthetically watching, feeling, thinking, not doing. Spectators become vicarious participants. Harrison notes that the attitude of the spectator, watching, feeling, thinking, not doing, is where art begins and ritual ends. In viewing the dance from a position just beyond the circle or from an outer circle, there is a split in the group. Those who become spectators in reducing some senses at the expense of others, or as McLuhan writes, stepping a sense up to high intensity, acts as an anesthetic for the other senses. In this way, the audience, through the dilation of sight, open themselves to objectifying the dance, viewing it as a form rather than an enfleshment of spirit, as an abstraction of form rather than a participation in presence. Form rises out of the conceptualization and abstraction of an abstraction facilitated by sight. Technique enters in order to maintain the form, to perfect the conceptualization. The dancers appear to personify the object, the form, and thereby the performance begets an idea. Idea coming from the Greek word for form and from its root ideing, to see. The idea rests with those who see the thing done. Also in Greek, theros, as in the spectator, the observer who does not take part in the action, and theoria, meaning contemplation, looking at or gazing at. Plato's performance as writing in the Republic and other dialogues privileges the spectator. The actor is mired in enfleshment and form is spirit released from the bonds of such. The position of audience viewing the action from the seats in the outer circle allow the dancers to personify and thereby become objects of contemplation. And this leads to conception and eventually pure form. Technique is the means to realization of a world of ideas and objectification of the constituents of an earlier revealed cosmos, constituents whose presence, once embodied, are now abstracted into pure form. Just as the group performing is transformed into actors and audience, the place goes through its own metamorphosis. In early Greek drama, the orchestra is still the dancing place, as seen in the theater at Epidaurus, which you see a picture of right here. Harrison writes, dramas of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides are not played on stage, not in the theater, but in the orchestra. The theater, theatron in Greek, is the place of seeing, the place where the spectators sat and viewed the performance. The seats symbolize rest, contemplation. The seats grow in importance until they give their name to the whole structure. Harrison writes, the marble seats are the very symbol of rest, aloofness from action. The seats for the spectators grow and grow in importance till at last they absorb, as it were, the whole spirit and give their name, theater, to the whole structure. Action is swallowed up in contemplation. Presence overcome by abstraction. The scene was the tent or hut in which the actors dressed. The scene encroaches on and takes over the orchestra, where the thing done becomes the thing seen, or the thing made, as in other art forms. Eventually, just as the group is split between actors and audience, the orchestra is cut in half and becomes a stage. The place of performance follows the action. Where at one time the whole group performed together around the circle and interacted with the surrounding milieu, drawing power from the space, a chora, and giving rise to the integration of all the community and presence, the new theater, the place of seeing, involves some of the people performing for others. Now the constituents of the space are divided, just as the place itself is divided. Each part plays its unique role, opens the individuals to abstraction. The consecrated place from which each participant derived meaning in the undifferentiated and fully present community is transformed into a profane place where utility gives rise to performances that circumscribe roles each performer plays. Actors, dancers, painters, and other artists become technicians who focus on a science of performance rather than an intuitive impulse to enact something felt in response to an array of constituents of the present milieu. The place is no longer an integral participant, an agent in the performance, a chora giving birth to and saturating the participants with presence. Erecting a place of performance has become an action of technique rather than of deep interaction with the intrinsic constituents of a particular space. In erecting the place, we employ technique in order to manipulate the constituents rather than participate with them. As performance has been divided between audience and artists, where one group performs an action while the other group vicariously participates, some of the audience members have become alienated from their important role as performers. These alienated ones allow others to actively engage in meaning making and then unreflectively follow the lead of those who may have become technicians. In many cases, the artists themselves have become consumed by the technical aspects of their craft and lose touch with the inspiration that fully embodied performances discovers. In the case of theater, the audience may indeed be moved through a vicarious experience, but their embodied participation is reduced and anesthesia to watching from a distance and reflecting on the actions of someone else. This gives rise to the hyper-rational and scientific schema that dominates modern and postmodern cultures, a reduction of hyperesthesia and privileging of the dilation of sight and anesthetic. The visual dominates in the sense ratios that give us the hyper-rational and scientific schema of the civilized culture. Christian Norberg Schultz writes, from childhood on, we learn to measure and classify, an abstract kind of understanding that has become dominant, which is generally known as, quote, scientific. In its extreme form, the scientific approach reduces the world to a set of resources and man to a complex of needs. We will never return to a tribal culture, but phenomenology may facilitate a return to a more balanced set of sense ratios, an awakening of hyperesthesia. In this awakening, we may also discover the other as a presence rather than a resource. Phenomenology employs bracketing conceptualizations, a return to the other who presents or gives themselves prior to our thematizing. As Merleau-Ponty writes, to turn back to the things themselves is to return to that world prior to knowledge, of which knowledge speaks. That is, a turning to presences that had been objectified in conceptual frames. One way to employ phenomenological bracketing would be to attend to the balance of senses. Merleau-Ponty writes, if I try to shut myself up in one of my senses and, for instance, project myself wholly into my eyes and abandon myself to the blue of the sky, soon I am unaware that I am gazing, and just as I strive to make myself sight and nothing but sight, the sky stops being a visual perception to become my world of the moment, end of quote. This world of the moment is the abstract form conceived by the dilation of sight. He continues, sensory experience is unstable and alien to natural perception, which we achieve with our whole body all at once, and which opens onto a world of interacting senses, end of quote. In this world of interacting senses, the presence of the other returns from abstraction, from the consciousness of the other to proximity with the other. Proximity, writes Levinas, cannot be reduced to any modality of distance or geometrical contiguity, nor to the simple representation. In his essay, Martin Buber, Gabriel Marcel, and Philosophy, Levinas writes that common to both the Jewish and Christian philosopher is the affirmation that human spirituality lies in the fact of the proximity of persons, neither lost in the mass nor abandoned to their solitude, end of quote. In the proximity of persons, the meeting unfolds prior to consciousness and manifests as responsibility. Dancing together gives rise to a community of responsible agents, meeting in co-presence. The I-thou relation Buber articulated is, quote, other than the perception of the other in his or her nature or essence, which would lead to truths or opinions expressed in the guise of judgments, as in the experience of any object whatsoever. The dilation of sight leads to conceiving the nature or essence of the other rather than meeting them in presence. Levinas notes that in challenging, quote, the claim of the intellectual act of knowledge as the spiritual primacy of intellectual objectivism, Buber and Marcel join others in the search for an ecstatic fullness of existence as a whole and for a presence that in the objectivity of the things to be known becomes limited and distorted. He continues, the ecstasis around which concrete human plenitude gathers is not the thematizing intentionality of experience, but the addressing of the other, a person-to-person relation culminating in the pronoun thou. The meeting for Marcel and relation for Buber break away from an ontology of the object and of substance, but characterize the I-thou relation in terms of being, Between is a mode of being, co-presence, co-esse. In reflecting on one of Marcel's speculative constructions, that is, of this body, I can say neither that it is I, nor that it is not I, nor that it is for me, that is an object. Levinas writes, there is no Cartesian separation between me and my body, nor a synthesis, but immediately an unobjectifiable lived participation. Cartesian dualism rises out of a privileging of sight and anesthetic. Lived participation happens in proximity rather than in consciousness. In his essay, Substitution, Levinas writes, to become conscious of a being is then always for that being to be grasped across an ideality and on the basis of a said, that is, happens in language as a schematism. So in order to encounter the other as an alterity, one cannot employ consciousness in this way, grasping across an ideality on the basis of a said. In the tribal dance referenced earlier in the essay, the participants do not grasp, nor engage in acts of articulation, nor are they cognizant of an ontological event. Rather, their actions flow out of the rhythm encompassing them, and they interact in proximity with each other prior to being thematized in consciousness. So how can phenomenology open us to presence? In contrasting proximity with ideality, Levinas wants to start in a place other than that of the philosophical tradition of the West, wherein all spirituality lies in consciousness, thematic exposition of being, knowing. That is, as represented in sedimented speech. He writes, in starting with sensibility interpreted not as a knowing, but as proximity, in seeking in language contact and sensibility, behind the circulation of information it becomes, we have endeavored to describe subjectivity as irreducible to consciousness and thematization. Proximity appears as the relationship with the other, who cannot be resolved into images or exposed to a theme. That is, the relation with the other must be dislodged from an anesthetic produced by the dilation of sight. Not able to appear in a theme, the invisibility becomes contact and obsession by an alternative way of signifying quite different from that which connects exposition to sight. In phenomenological bracketing, the other becomes invisible, presencing in proximity prior to thematizing. Here, the one for the other is not a lack of intuition, but the surplus of responsibility. This for signifies in saying before showing itself in the said. The other's presence manifests prior to visibility, but a dilation of sight causes us to forget proximity and focus on the conception in consciousness. In our example of the dance evolving to drama, saying signifies the dance before showing itself in the dramatic action of tragedy. Signifying is not limited to visual sensation, but the one for the other invisibly reveals a hyper-aesthetic relation manifest in proximity. Levinas writes, the relationship of proximity cannot be reduced to any modality of distance or geometrical contiguity, nor to the simple representation of a neighbor. It is already an assignation, an obligation, anachronously prior to any commitment. Merleau-Ponty approaches the hyperaesthetic relation from a different angle. Rather than Levinas's outline of obsession, an inversion of consciousness, and a passivity beneath all passivity that cannot be defined in terms of intentionality, Merleau-Ponty tells us that sensation is intentional. Here, sensation is not a dilation of one or two senses, but the whole sensing body. The sentient subject does not posit an external being as an object, but enters into sympathetic relation with them. Through our mutual embodiment, amongst others, our co-presence, we are sensitive to all the rest, which reverberates to all sounds, vibrates to all colors, and provides words with their primordial significance through the way in which it receives them. The primordial significance would be a saying versus being thematized in the said. In the tribal dance, our bodies are, as Merleau-Ponty writes, a ready-made system of equivalents and transpositions from one sense to another. Rather than an anesthetic dilation of sight whereby we colonize the other with our gaze, all senses balance in a hyperesthesia, revealing the invisible as presence. Finally, to conclude, I just show a couple pictures of the seats here and the scenery. My walking through the forest is a kind of circle dance with the other creatures therein. I hear a woodpecker laughing from the treetops and then tapping away on a log. I hear the chatter of a kingfisher perched over a tidal creek before swooping across the water. I hear the mating calls of various species of frogs, invisible along the banks of a muddy stream. I smell the musky aroma of a fox who has marked her territory. I feel the presence of all these invisible creatures as we dance in proximity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I forgot to give you your 5-minute warning because I was so engrossed in what you were saying. So thank you. Oh, there goes my timer. That was very perfectly timed.
All right.
Thank you for such a wonderful and, acute explanation of phenomenology and kind of bringing that into play here with this sort of Greek tragedy. It was very wonderful. So we have about 10 minutes for questions, and I'll go ahead and open it up. So please raise your hand or pop up an emoji if you would like to ask a question. Yes, Robert.
I can't help it. I come to this conference and I get inspired, spiritus. I breathe in and it's like, yeah, baby. And I'm in the tribal dance with you, Mr. Kip.
All right.
The presence of your voice, the language that you use, and all that stuff, the world of the moment, the dilation of sight is like, I didn't understand that before, but I think I get a sense of it now. And so I just want to say thank you. And I love this idea of connecting all this, the Greek stuff with the carved stone seats. So there's this hard amphitheater there, and then you show us a path in the woods. And it's like, how do I rectify that? Like, which world is which? Well, am I in both? Is it this idea that, the hyper aesthetic dancing lives in me, even in the other environments too? I don't know, but I'm just inspired by this dance that you put forth with us that I became a part of with you. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always good to I wish we had time to converse together, on the side, but so good to see you and hear you. Thank you.
Yes, Anne.
Yeah, I like the play with the word anesthesia because it's without aesthesis, and aesthesis means perception.
I have sent you a link.
Oh.
All right, I hear you, Anne.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And what I was thinking is that in the midst of the dance, right, the choral dance, do we have aesthesis? Do we have perception? And yet we're not anesthetized.
No, I think that when we're dancing together, before other people sit down and watch, that we are. Another thing that I explore in other papers is the what's called flow. It's the flow experience, and in flow, it's the merging of action and awareness. And so you stop becoming aware of yourself as a kind of separate entity. Earlier, you were talking about ending this dichotomy of subject and object. In flow, there's an ending of the dichotomy, but at the same time, it's not a melting into complete oneness, right? And it's like in a dance, you kind of have a mystical participation with one another, where the dichotomy of you and the other isn't rigid, but yet you still remain two, not one.
Right, but in the choral experience, there is the dissolution of the individual. The individual is dissolved, so there's no aesthesis per se.
Yeah.
But everyone is feeling in unison.
Yeah, I agree that there isn't the sense of the individual, okay? But Buber actually articulates this really well when he outlines several forms of mysticism, and the form of mysticism that he is coming to is a form of mysticism where the I and the thou don't merge into each other to become just a one. But at the same time, there is no sense of the individual ego. Okay.
Right, but I think that in Greek tragedy, though, there was a purposeful attempt to have the dissolution, to have all of us together, the unit be in the whole. So like in the chorus, right?
Right.
So originally there's no audience.
Right, exactly.
So in the choral experience, the chanting of the same thing together is like the dance that you were describing.
Sure.
So I think that in that sense, it's not quite what Buber was capturing, but it's something else that transforms us, because we cease to be. We're like Dionysus.
Yeah, I come down with Buber. I don't think we cease to be, but I do think it's ecstatic, and that we cease to be separate. That's what we cease to be. We cease to be separate, and we join together. But we join together in an I and a thou. So there's a union, right? And I think that's where the erotic symbolism fits perfectly, right? Where the lovers are coming together and having this ecstatic union together, but they still remain two lovers. They just feel as though they've merged. Lost.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced.
All right.
But I do enjoy it. I enjoyed your talk very much.
Thank you.
Buber that doesn't convince me, not you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a little bit of time. If there's any other question. Yes, Morongi.
Kip, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
And good to see you too. I have a question, that is a Buber question, and perhaps an extra Buber, question. When Buber talks about I and thou, right?
Yes.
Does the thou include a tree, an animal, grass, stars? These are the core objects as a human being.
Yes. There's a section where that he makes that possible. And I also think it's in Levinas too. Mm-hmm. There's a particular passage in Levinas where he actually talks about a tree. Yeah.
Now, the question, if there's a place for one in many, right? What does one mean, entail when the thou is not another person, another human being,
right.
but an object, a thing, a tree, and so a fish, and so on.
Right. Yeah. I step a little bit further out than both Levinas and Buber, but I think that they inspired me, and also Heidegger. So here's what I think on this idea is, Heidegger's essay on the thing, right? And the things, yes. Right. Yeah. So I think that I want to step further. Let's take your tree for instance, right? So the trees, right? Right. So and each individual tree is treeing uniquely, unlike other trees, right? Right. And so even when we use the term tree and we apply it to the myriad of trees that are out there, we've lost the I thou that Buber's talking about, because we've abstracted all the trees into the same thing, right? They've all merged into this one idea, which is again a visual kind of symbol. Whereas when I'm walking in the woods and I stop the anesthesia and allow the hyperesthesia to take over, I come to the point where each tree I come across is unique and of its own, and we are relating, and the tree is treeing, and I am, you know, I don't know the name of the tree, right? But that tree right there is treeing.
Okay.
And in that way I stop being human, and I'm whatever Kip is, I'm kipping.
Okay.
The tree is treeing, and I'm kipping.
Yeah.
Right. You're marungiing right now, and I'm kipping. Right. We're thinging together, right? Aren't we?
Yeah. So you would go along with the idea that as you walk on the woods also walk on you. And
yeah,
if that is the
definitely.
case, then how do we understand? How do we experience walking?
Yeah.
In other words, perhaps I'm talking about the possibility of an aesthetics that is not humanistic. Yeah. That incorporates, the other. But
yes.
How does one experience the incorporating the other who is not human?
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm right with you. I mean, we have to, in order to have that, we have to open ourselves up, right? To do the phenomenological bracketing, to shut our conceptual kind of anesthesia off, so that we can, as Merleau-Ponty speaks about, being in a circuit with the world, right? The Einfühlung, right? Being in a circuit. If I'm in a circuit with the world, then I'm not just isolating the world by any one of my senses, or even by a pairing of senses, but my whole body, right? It juxtaposed to their bodies together happen, and they are expressing as well. Definitely.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I see Linda has a question, and we're sort of running out of time here, so hopefully we can maybe hear it and have a quick answer.
Okay.
Yeah, this is very brief. Thank you. So Kip, how does the I-thou experience, or does it account for what would be sort of outside of either one, something exponential?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
In other words, in the feeling, in the experience that, let's say, I would have,
right?
And then the thou, that it is still a separate entity in a sense.
Well, the way Buber addresses that is that he distinguishes between experience and encounter.
Okay.
Experience happens within us, okay, and so when you have a relation with a thou, you're not having experience, okay? You're having an encounter. An encounter happens between. That's why Gabriel Marcel, he uses the word meeting rather than the word relation. That we meet together between. So the meeting isn't in any one of us. So we lose the subject object distinction with both Marcel and Levinas and Buber in that way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Kip. That was a very wonderful presentation. And I see that our next chair is here, our friend and colleague Zeke Botukuma. And so I will pass the torch to you to carry on with our next speaker.
Thank you very much. If you could help me determine who is the next speaker, because all I have is a list of presenters without any specific order.
So next we have Sandra McCalla.
Okay, followed by
Linda Ardito.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a break.
Yeah.
Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sandra McCalla. She teaches philosophy in the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy, Faculty of Humanities and Education, University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Kingston, Jamaica. Her specialty areas include ethics, applied ethics, and philosophy of sports. She also has a strong interest in the field of aesthetics. Please join me in listening to Dr. McKellar's presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Botakumo. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. All right, so my talk today will focus on the topic cultural epistemology, capturing knowledge through street art. Now, in terms of my objective, this is a part of a bigger paper. And I argue that objective knowledge is really only one form of knowledge that relies on cultural and subjective knowledge claims for its instantiation. And I seek to elucidate the multidimensional nature of the Jamaican epistemological system and the nature and the composition of street art. And ladies and gentlemen, I know that you will agree with me that as human beings, there is no doubt that we are art. And what I mean by that is that art is deeply embedded within us and forms the very core of our being in ways that we express ourselves, in different forms such as dress, language, sports, dance, as Kip spoke about earlier, music, drawings, paintings, and so on. And it is through these art forms that epistemology or knowledge is really captured and communicated, and in unique ways that really depict the historical, the social, and cultural outlook and the epistemological system. So we find that when we look at these artistic expressions, human beings through art and artistic expressions are really bearers of knowledge. Thus, epistemology is really shaped by our ontology of being, our ontology of existence. And it is really with this view in mind that I embark on this research to really show the importance of subjects, in this case, street artists and audience alike, to the development of epistemology, where these subjects are integral to the development of this multicultural epistemological system or framework. So in a quest to elucidate the multidimensional nature of the Jamaican epistemological system, the nature, the composition of street art, I will examine those through the lenses of contemporary and traditional art theories such as mimesis or imitation, instrumentalism, expressionism, and so on. And I will briefly, define key concepts first and then discuss the history of street art and show the epistemological imports in the form of the theories mentioned. And I will wrap up by exploring cultural epistemology through art. What really is street art? Street art is often referred to as post-graffiti or neo-graffiti, and graffiti has historically been viewed as a form of vandalism, a curious enigma, and a menace to society, and we can talk about that later. Reed, for example, saw graffiti and street art muralism. He thought that these came about from the same family, but muralism takes a more deliberate and skilled approach and is usually commissioned to be done with permission. Street art is, mural done by artists who chooses to express their beliefs, their feelings, their emotions on the biggest canvas that they can find. And in most cases, that canvas happens to be the side of a building. So I'm now going to go into the history of street art in general and within the Jamaican context. So this phenomenon really has roots in the underground art movement that boomed in New York and other places in the 1970s and 80s, when young hip hoppers and baby boomers met downtown New York. So it boomed during that period, but it existed way before this. You know, for example, before there were buildings, before there were bridges or other man-made structures to write on. I pose the question, what did our ancestors do? What we now refer to as cave paintings, in my mind, can be viewed as the graffiti and the street art of the period. And we have garnered immense knowledge from those works of art. So like modern street artists, the Neanderthals used the biggest canvas that they could find, you know, to really express their beliefs, their knowledge, you know, of their world, their ideologies, and so on. So their cave, or should I say street art, conveyed stories of the past, the tales of their origin, the realities of the present day. And one of the oldest forms of art, cave painting, is found in Spain, and you know, those are believed to be between 43,000 and 65,000 years old. And those cave wall paintings are synonymous with our expressive street arts today. And maybe like us, it might be possible that in the future, our street art might just be the only remaining historical records that give the future generation a glimpse into the past, our present. All right, so then when we look at the history of street art within the Jamaican context, we find that ever since colonial times, Jamaica's art scene is constantly evolving, inspired by classical European art at first. It was only in the 1920s that Jamaicans really developed their national style, and intuitive artists like Capo and others started showcasing their work. And we find that from the 1940s onward, visual arts, you know, became more political, and, you know, the strong desire to become independent became the main source and inspiration of Jamaican artists. But today, Jamaican artists are famous for producing, you know, emotional but also thought-provoking works that can be found all around the island and in museums across the world. So we find that murals are often done to depict a variety of meanings and record major individual, cultural, and social events and occurrences. For example, if we should look at memorial murals in inner city Kingston, Jamaica, these, for example, point to the, you know, the importance in practices related to grief, related to mourning, and also in commemoration and celebration. So street art that is created to commemorate the dead is a part of the visual landscape. And we find that many inner city neighborhoods in these, you know, can be found in many of those inner city neighborhoods in Kingston. So these memorial murals are really added to the walls that wrap around the perimeter of houses or shape some centrally located and regularly traversed by neighborhood residents and so on. And others are found in more obscure locations that have a personal link to the deceased. For example, the house where they lived and so on. So street artists who live in or close to the neighborhood where, where these murals are located are really commissioned by friends and families to paint these murals. And we find that today, ladies and gentlemen, downtown Kingston is really a buzz of excitement, and the city was dubbed the biggest art district in the Caribbean. So this, the first street to be revived was a street called Fleet Street, which started a unique social intervention project. And this project was launched by a French visitor, Mariana Farag. She visited Jamaica and she decided to partner with some local artists to start this movement, this street art movement. And then later we found that, government and other private sponsors realized the benefits of this initiative and decided to expand the art district. So to date, there are several art murals, I think it's over 70 or so in that area, some with augmented reality as this one that is on the slide. The artist is Bernard Stanley, and he is standing in front of this mural that has been animated into augmented reality. So let us go into, I hope I have time, let us go into the epistemological foundations and the theories and so on. So what really is epistemology? So it is really that philosophical study of knowledge, and epistemology seeks to understand knowledge, the nature of knowledge and the availability and so on. So to say that I know often really denotes meaning to the knower, as the concept of knowledge can be opaque and generate skepticism or mistrust. And this is dependent on the source which really establishes it. So knowledge is based on, individual opinions, universal statements, and so on. So in any knowledge forming process, we find that society plays an integral role, hence the theoretical significance of social epistemology. So at the practical level, it is really important. It is important because of, its possible role in the redesign of information-related social institutions. So it is this knowledge that really forms the core of any cultural epistemological system. So we find that the relationship between art and knowledge has a long history, but unfortunately, as far as Western thought is concerned, for example, the greater part of that history has consisted of arguments that try to keep the two apart, epistemology and art. So because of that, it is really useful to differentiate between the kinds of knowledge, such as, objectual knowledge, practical proposition. So for example, objectual knowledge, expressed by sentences to form, use, for example, variables, S knows X, for example, where X stands for a name or a definite description. So we may say, for example, that we know people or places. Then we have the practical knowledge or the know-how, that is knowledge involving being able to do something, right? For example, knowing how to paint, knowing how to draw a flower. And we have propositional knowledge, justified knowledge that something is the case. So if we should go back to philosophers, if we should go back to philosophers such as Plato. Plato, in his explanation of mimesis or imitation theory of art, really posited that knowledge cannot be derived from and through art, as art is simply, it imitates reality. Plato says that art imitates the objects and events of ordinary life. So in other words, a work of art is a copy of a form. So for him, form is really, abstract, is perfect, unchanging concepts or ideals, and these really transcend time and space. Now, since art is an imitation of nature, Plato reasoned that it is useless, it is potentially dangerous. So as an imitation of knowledge, of nature, it really adds no knowledge, or it adds no intellectual value. And I challenge this notion by arguing that it is that tenet of being able to transmit or imitate reality on a canvas or a wall that makes street art and other forms of art beneficial to seekers of knowledge, as it transmits this reality to the public through the eyes of the artist, which can then be evaluated and in essence utilized. If we should look at another philosophy within that era, Aristotle, like Plato, argued that art was also imitation, but he maintained that good art was neither useless nor dangerous, but rather natural and beneficial. So we find that art serves, as an educational tool, since it uses and really encourages the imaginative manipulation of ideas. So through Aristotle's views, although Aristotle's views were not coined with street art in mind, I believe that they hold great significance in how we analyze art today, as having that power to really transmit knowledge. And we can look at philosophers such as Jung, who stated that just as scientists conduct experiments and gather observations before constructive theories, it is felt that so good artists make a careful study of the objects they intend to represent. And Jung concludes then that art can provide propositional knowledge, so they can teach us that something is the case or transmit reality. So works of art can also provide non-propositional knowledge as well, knowledge of how to do something, the ability to recognize something. So in particular, an artwork can give the audiences that capacity to really apply concepts of knowledge of what certain mental states are like. This sort of knowledge cannot be expressed in propositional terms. So for this type of knowledge—
5 minutes, please.
Thank you. For this type of knowledge, Jung regarded this as practical knowledge. So what I did was merge propositional and practical knowledge to advance my stance on the multidimensional sociocultural epistemological framework. So art has a potential of also transmitting emotions, feelings are brought to the surface and so on. For example, we can look at some of these inner feelings, these inner emotions, where, for example, the artist expresses this emotional state, and brings it outside of him or herself, so to speak, by trying to use some configuration of lines, of shapes, of colors, of sounds, in an appropriate way that would really match a particular feeling. So feeling the same kind of outrage, for example, towards sexual violence against women, street artists may engage the public through their work in such a way that the audience feel, that kind of rage. If we should look at, I'm going to skip through that. So we find then that street art has utility and plunges people into action. For instance, politicians and policymakers can use knowledge derived from street art to formulate policies beneficial to tackling economic and social issues concerning crime and violence, police brutality, poverty, grief, and so on. So this owes not only significance for Jamaican policymakers, but policymakers across the world. If we should go back to memorial street art, for example, there have been disputes on memorial murals in America in certain times, about how the victims of 9/11 were memorialized. So some persons had issues with the design, including how the victims were remembered and so on. So we can look at some of those as well. So when we look at street art is really an appropriate tool for activists to enlist in and fight against epistemic injustice as well, injustices that result from negative identity prejudices that silence certain groups of people unfairly. We also find that, you know, it promotes critical thinking. It helps us to see the world in a new way or a different way. So art, unlike institutions, or, you know, can communicate more immediately and over long periods, you know, so it's a way of getting one's voice out to those who need to hear it, to change those institutional structures. So street artists have control over the street. And as a result, they also have tacit control over social imagination and so on. So if we should look at this particular artwork, am I out of time?
1 minute, please.
All right, so in concluding, we find then that street art is really important in communicating, you know, not only feelings, but bringing all of these things to the fore, to the surface. So street art really has the power of capturing knowledge through expressions, imitations, experiencing, and giving human societies fresh canvases to learn and to acquire knowledge that is really preserved for future generations. So the street tells stories that time cannot erase. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. McKellar. Well, at this point, we are open to comments and or questions. And please, organizers, feel free to take over if I don't respect the time, because I'm out of time right now. So
sorry.
It's not your problem. It's yeah, Dr. Murungi.
Yes, Sandra, thank you very much, you know, for your presentation. I have a question for you, and the question is, with the emergence of street art in Jamaica, what is happening to the rest of art? By the rest of art, I mean the art that was situated in museums and galleries.
What is happening to those?
Say again?
Say that again. What is happening to those?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay, all right. I'm asking, with the presence of street art, right? What is happening, you know, to the other, you know, art that is placed in museums and galleries in Jamaica?
Thank you so much for that question. And this is a very interesting question. I went downtown a few weeks ago, and I sought to engage, and I have a friend online who took some pictures for me as well, you know, for this presentation, and she also works as a librarian, and then I asked her that same question. So what some of these individuals are doing in the galleries, they seem to start taking some of the artwork and placing those at the entrances, you know, of these art galleries, right? Because we find that with this art district, we have a lot of, it's attracting a lot of tourists to downtown Kingston. So in that way, these individuals are also captured and will then enter into these galleries to view some of the work as well. But I don't really think it, you know, delimits what they have been doing in, you know, in a great way. So thanks for that question.
Yes.
Any other question? By Janae? Could you please unmute? Yeah.
I had to turn my mic on. So I'm sort of curious. I love the images of the street art, and I love murals. I found lately that murals are, like, you know, really popular. And so what's happening, I think, is they were originally maybe more for, they were sort of like outsider art almost. They were people who were just sort of expressing themselves in these places without permission. And what's happened is a lot of, like, towns like Towson, for instance, have decided that murals are like decoration. And so, you know, there's like this, I think there's like this push pull there between, using these sort of spaces to kind of really impact people. I mean, they still do as decoration, but it's like kind of a different. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Right. So when this started, that was, what these artists had in mind. But over time, it grew to, looking at some thought-provoking entities, things that affect individuals within society. For example, there's so many murals that, they were really developed to really embed embed and discuss aspects of, or show aspects of freedom and where we're coming from as a people. So you find that, those great significance, they are now in those artworks. But I can say, as I said earlier, when it started out, that was what, Marian and others had in mind, but it grew to be more than that. Thanks for your question.
Yes, a question by Madeline Georgievich.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was thrilling. I have a question and I have a curiosity. The curiosity, did you engage in any street art? Like, did you make anything while you were studying?
I didn't make anything.
Okay, that was my curiosity. But
right, so I went and I took pictures and I talked to some of the artists and so on.
Very cool, very cool. And then my question kind of was similar to Marungi's, which was thinking about, I kind of want to know what you think about museums, because I wonder if you think it is immoral to lock up art, because what you kind of showed us was that there's this social, almost imperative. It seems like an ethical, political dimension of maybe we have this requirement to connect and it should be public. So do you think there's any kind of ethical dimension to think through about that?
In terms of censorship and in terms of the viewership that these museums, have now, since we have all of these street art, you find that, and I love your question, because we find that, and I probably need to, in my study, look into this deeper to see, if this street art movement, if these museums are really affected in significant ways. Well, I don't really think so, but in terms of having these, locked up and so on, we can link this to freedom of expression, censorship, and then the ethical and the moral issues will also come out there as well. Thank you.
Any more question? Yeah, question by Anne Asper. Would you please unmute yourself?
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed your presentation and it's so beautiful. I wanted to, it made me think about, since we're all going to the museum, it made me think about other art as also somehow yielding some kind of social imagination. And I'm thinking of Picasso's Guernica, where in fact we have this incredible display of the destruction that happened of the people who supported the Republic in Spain. So there are pieces of art that are separate, or I'm thinking, or Las Hilanderas, Velázquez Hilanderas. I don't know, suddenly all of this other art came to mind and I kept thinking it's not in the street, it's not expressing all of those, but there's knowledge there.
Right, right. Are you finished with your
Yes, yes,
okay,
but I just want to hear your thoughts.
Right, right. So I specifically chose street art because I wanted to engage with these street artists more because of the negative connotations that were attached to graffiti and street art even up to 2010 in Jamaica. I remember at one point in 2010, that's not so long ago, where the Prime Minister of Jamaica at that time really commissioned some police officers to go into areas of downtown Kingston and paint over some of the.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So that's, a very interesting and important question that you asked, so we can link it to the history. So I was really enthused by this movement and thought I should, write a paper about it. And I believe that, these all artworks are able to project this kind of knowledge, whether we're looking at propositional or non-propositional. But I just chose that to be the focus because, of that history within the Jamaican.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Is there any other question? Fran, please. Please unmute yourself. Yes.
I did. Yes, it was a wonderful talk. Thank you very, very much. And it brought to mind something that I was told when I went to the Czech Republic. I went there some years ago to teach and was told that when the Russians came in to take over the city, they painted all the buildings which had been painted these beautiful pastel colors. And to express their domination, they painted all the buildings over battleship gray. And it was a kind of an act of suppression and domination. Right. And so, you're speaking of something similar where these are painted over. So evidently, art is very threatening, can be very threatening to the powers that be, the authorities.
I agree. And there was so much outrage because, persons were now saying, critics were saying, hey, we have to think about freedom of expression, for these artists. Thanks for that.
Okay, as somebody born and raised in Africa, I do understand the importance of art as far as teaching is concerned. In pre-colonial era, when there was no writing as we know today, art was the way people used to teach morals. Right. And so for that reason, I enjoy the part of your talk dealing with the relationship between art and knowledge, as well as the relationship between art and teaching or education, because from an African perspective, there are records of many arts works that were used for the purpose of teaching morals and behaviors. So that's the part I really enjoyed.
Thank you.
I'm not sure about the time we have for adding more questions, but I think we have to move to the next presentation.
Yes.
Please join me in once again applauding Sandra McKellar for her presentation. Okay, I am going to introduce the next presenter, which is Dr. Linda Ardito, right?
Correct.
Linda Ardito researches and writes on subjects in the arts and humanities. She has had a long career as professor of music in New York. She has co-edited and authored book chapters in Home, Lived Experiences, Philosophical Reflections, The Theory in Philosophy, Sensorial Trajectories, Elemental Sensuous Phenomenology and Aesthetics, and Rendezvous with the Sensuous, Readings on Aesthetics. She has also authored chapters in 1, Creativity, Fostering measuring, and context, and symbolic landscapes. She has entries, very important, she has entries in the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, the Grove Dictionary of American Music, and the Encyclopedia of Education and Human Development, as well as journal articles in Skepsis, International Journal of Musicology, and Perspectives of New Music, among other things. Please join me in welcoming our next presenter, Linda Ardito.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so my paper title is The Allure of Water in Ancient Greek Philosophy and Myth. And Zeki, you can just let me know when I'm about 5 minutes from the end.
Okay.
I probably have more than I need right here, so I'm going to try to cut it down as I go. Water is essential to all life on Earth. It covers over 70% of Earth's surface. The human body is comprised of nearly as much, at approximately 60%. Within the body, water is integral to the movement of materials into the cells, which is critical to the production of energy, and out of the cells, which is critical to the removal of toxic substances. These are among the many processes that demonstrate water's vital role with respect to the physical systems of the human body. Indeed, water is a major component of most parts of the body. It is essential to digestion and the growth, reproduction, and survival of bodily cells, and to the lubrication of joints, the regulation of body temperature, and the transport of oxygen throughout the body. Thus, it is hardly surprising that we literally thirst for water, a desire exemplifying one of the many facets behind its allure, and perhaps even partly behind our attraction to its aesthetic dimensions. Countless factors doubtless fuel our response to water's allure. Yet, regardless of the many ways in which we might seek to understand water, there remains a mystery about it, which in itself might also be a factor in its allure. In this paper, I shall consider the basis and nature of the relationship between humans and water in the context of its allure as understood in early Greek philosophy and myth, as the early Greeks were among those who have contemplated water in an effort to better understand its nature, meaning, and diverse manifestations. So I go into a little bit about its definition. Until the second half of the 18th century, water was considered a fundamental element. After this, water would be understood as the most plentiful and essential of chemical compounds. A water molecule is a polar molecule, and it is comprised of 3 atoms, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Water exists in liquid, gaseous, and solid states. In its liquid form, it is understood to be colorless, transparent, and odorless, and is the basis for the formation of oceans, seas, lakes, rivers, and rain. It is also found in the fluids of living organisms. Though water is typically known to be colorless, in actuality, it does have a slight bluish tint, caused not by the scattering of light, as for example in the case of the sky appearing to be blue, but by the absorption by water molecules of the red end of the spectrum of visible light. In contemplating water's allure, it is interesting to note the 2 processes of attraction, that is positive and negative, already found within the polar molecule of water itself. More specifically, the water molecule is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to an oxygen atom. Their bonding renders water a solvent that causes most all substances to dissolve. This process is possible owing to the polarity within the molecule. The hydrogen atoms tend to cluster on one side of the molecule, which creates a positive region, while the other, oxygen end, has a negative charge. The positive hydrogen end tends to attract the negative ions, or those atoms with an extra electron in their outer shell. And I promise you, the chemistry isn't going to go much further than this. At the same time, the negative region attracts positive ions in which one of their electrons is removed. Though we understand this in scientific terms, with respect to the water molecule, we are not typically mindful of this level of attraction as we go about our everyday lives. Okay, so now I say a little bit in general about ancient Greek philosophy and water. From earliest times, philosophers have contemplated the nature of water and have referenced its allure. Pre-Socratic philosophers, Thales of Miletus, who Aristotle called the first philosopher, believed water to be the sole fundamental building block of all matter, from the botanical and physiological to the meteorological and geological. He is said to have noted its different forms and to have declared that one should, quote, meditate on water, end quote. This declaration is a call to contemplate water's essentiality and ubiquity. It is also a call indicative of its allure. Bailey's allusion to water as that which takes different forms is a reference to its transformative properties and omnipresence. Water fascinates in its ubiquity and in its essentiality. Bailey posits that all is constituted of water in its various forms. Indeed, he calls water the fundamental substance, or what Aristotle calls the first cause of all matter. Moreover, he envisions Earth to be a flat disk floating upon an expansive sea. Aristotle would explain his belief that water is the first cause by the observation of its unchanging nature despite its changeability with respect to shape and movement. Thales took a logical approach to understanding water's behavior. For example, he is known to have believed that the fortuitous annual flooding of Egypt's Nile River, which enriched the soil for excellent harvest, was caused by natural as opposed to supernatural phenomenon that in this case would have been associated with the Egyptian god Hapi. Notwithstanding the question of whether its flooding is explained in natural or supernatural terms, this flooding of the Nile is vital to the growing and harvesting of crops. In the anticipation of this phenomenon, we again observe water's allure. In the Nile's hoped for flooding, it would be as if water is drawing one to itself, as this phenomenon was unreservedly recognized to be of paramount importance. Broadly, it could be said that water's allure ensures the perpetuation of all life, and thus it would seem inherent to water itself. And now a little bit about ancient Greek mythology in terms of water. In virtually all ancient mythologies, water is associated with our very origins and way of life. Moreover, it is implicated in Earth's origin, as we find, for example, in the Indian poetic text, the Rigveda, where the dawn of Earth is described as a darkness and an unrecognizable and salty ocean. In Mesopotamian Babylonian mythologies, we find that the gods themselves are formed from a combination of salty and sweet water. In Greek and Roman myth, the sea was ascribed a god, Poseidon in the former instance and Neptune in the latter. To worship these kinds of primordial gods is to respond to a powerfully fundamental call, a call rooted in what I call in this chapter, water's allure. There are multifarious bases for this allure, some apparent, others less so, or not at all. Water in its various forms as bodies of salt or fresh water or as precipitation is treated in a wide range of mythologies, such as those in which it is responsible for the origins of the earth, the gods, and humans and their civilizations. My discussion about water's allure is limited to three selected Greek myths, that of Narcissus, the myth of Orpheus, and that of the Sirens. Though these three myths have all been subject to varying accounts and interpretations over time, I have chosen to discuss their popular accounts as they lend themselves to interesting, varied, and sometimes unexpected interpretation with respect to the present subject. The myth of Narcissus. In the myth of Narcissus, water is the medium of Narcissus' attraction to his own image. This attraction is obviously possible owing to water's reflective nature under the proper atmospheric and environmental conditions. Considered more deeply, however, Narcissus' initial attraction would be not to his own image, but to water itself, the medium that brings his reflection to life. Perhaps it could be said that Narcissus' response to water is a response to its allure, a response not necessarily recognized on a conscious level. Moreover, as it is a response to water's nature, it is a response to his own nature. Indeed, he recognizes himself in water. In this sense, Narcissus and water are indivisible. This is not to say that this relationship is intentionally portrayed in the Narcissus myths. Even so, it becomes no less relevant when we consider water's essentiality with respect to all life forms, with respect to the human body. Water is both external and internal to the human body. Thus, water draws us to itself, as we possess human bodies significantly comprised of water, We thirst for water. We immerse ourselves in water. We delight in its aesthetic beauty in nature settings. Thus, it is in these observations that we may say that water would naturally enough be alluring to Narcissus, not only because he recognizes himself in its reflection, but also because it could be said that he would also subliminally recognize water's implicit relationship to his own body, his own self. In this sense, when Narcissus sees himself in the water's reflection, he also sees something transcendent and yet inseparable from his own image. What he sees is water, water perhaps unconsciously understood to be the basis for his reflected image and his very own self. In seeing his reflection, he also sees the water that brings it to life. He cannot see his image without seeing water, as he and water are one. Indeed, the reflection is an illusion, while the water exists, albeit in a continually transformative sense. In water, he sees himself making his reflection a symbol of this recognition. Indeed, what does he see when he looks upon water's surface? He sees himself. This illusory image might be imagined to symbolize how Narcissus comes to the truth that he and water are one. He exists because of this union. How then would it be possible for him to resist falling in love with his watery image? It is this image that looks back at him, but it is not an image unto itself. The image comes into being because of water, just as all life comes into being. Water is what brings to life the image of Narcissus, just as it brings Narcissus and all life into existence. This dimension of water's allure is not explicit in the myth, of course, yet as we contemplate this union between Narcissus and water, it becomes implicitly powerful beyond the tale, its meaning finding true relevance. Okay, so now we are going to the myth of Orpheus. In a mythic context, our understanding of Orpheus, famed singer to the lyre, largely derives from Book 4 of Virgil's poem, the Georgics. Pre-Virgilian references to Orpheus are not of the expanded variety as found in Virgil's myth, and the matter of his origins remain uncertain. No reference to Orpheus is found in the Homeric literature. There are nevertheless tentative genealogical constructs linking him as ancestor to Homer and other celebrated bards. The number of generations arrived at within these genealogies suggests that Orpheus dates from around the 13th century BCE. Of course, as stated by G.S. Kirk, Orpheus has no true connection with the regular framework of Greek myths until his appearance as crew member aboard the Argo. From this myth, the dating by the Greeks for Orpheus is put at a generation before the Trojan War. Even so, Orpheus may date from a more remote time. Indeed, the Argonaut myth is among the earliest known to the Greeks, dating from about the 9th or 10th century BCE. However, in Greek tradition, Orpheus's identity is not fixed. Though the musician of the Argonaut myth and the Orpheus of legend are not necessarily the same figure, the theme of water is common to both. The former figure underscores the extreme antiquity of this connection, which may have prehistoric roots. For example, Peter Green, in his introduction to Apollonius's Argonautica, cites what is perhaps an archaeologic credible dating of the legend. Quote, "The legend enshrines memories of expeditions designed to acquire the new, much prized and still little understood techniques of smelting and forging metal as far back as the late 4th or 3rd millennium. It is uncertain whether this dating has any basis in truth. However, in the Odyssey, we do know that, as mentioned by Green, quote, Jason's ship Argo was already common knowledge, and that other references in the Iliad and the Odyssey are similarly casual enough to presume widespread familiarity," end quote. The most popular, comprehensive, and intact literary sources that mention Orpheus include Apollonius Rhodius's Argonautica, a newer treatment of the old myth of Jason and the Argonauts, in which Orpheus is crew member aboard the Argo, Book 4 of Virgil's Georgics, and Book 6 of his Aeneid, and Books 10 and 11 of Ovid's Metamorphoses. Of course, the best known of the extant Orphic myths is that of Orpheus's tragic love for his bride. Though aspects of this myth are known by the 5th century BCE, the Orpheus-Eurydice myth is later given more extensive treatment in Book 4 of Virgil's Georgics. Here, Orpheus is a figure of great pathos, as he is ultimately unsuccessful at rescuing his bride. Eurydice from the shadowy realm of the underworld. As Virgil describes it, quote, suddenly out of his sight, like smoke into thin air, she vanishes away, unable anymore to see him, as he vainly grasped at shadows with so much more to say, end quote. Orpheus returns from Hades to the land of the living. Without having successfully retrieved his bride, he is essentially dead to the world. The tragic imagery associated with him in this context is far removed from that which we find in fragment 62 of Simonides, which dates from around 500 BCE, where, quote, over his head flew numberless birds and fish leaped straight up from the dark blue water at his beautiful song, end quote. In Simonides' treatment, Orpheus sings his beautiful song, its sonic waves calling forth many birds that fly overhead and fish that leap from the dark blue water. Life is motion, and this setting is energetic, life-affirming, even celebratory. In Virgil's Georgic, however, Orpheus departs from Hades, forlorn, fittingly singing his song against the backdrop of a vast frozen region, a region that in its frozenness tells us that his life is slipping away. For 7 months, he wanders alone over the icy steppes of the farthest north, singing only of his loss. He thinks of no new love, being dead to the world, a condition accompanied by water in its frozen state. In popular accounts of the myth, he remains in a trance-like state, wandering alone for months. Eventually, he's killed at the hands of the Thracian Maenads, worshippers of Dionysus who are in Bacchic revelry and perhaps angered at Orpheus's rejection of any woman other than Eurydice. Orpheus's demise is brutal. He is torn to pieces and his head is tossed into the Hebrus River, where it continues singing the name of Eurydice. The flowing river and singing head are both expressions of the dynamism inherent in the natures of water and music. Moreover, the dynamism of the flowing river is what carries Orpheus's singing head to the island of Lesbos, where it finds its burial. In one sense, the river and the decapitated singing head of Orpheus symbolize opposite phenomenon. The sounded, ordered music of Orpheus's song and the improvisatory, meandering water of the river. Yet these opposites are precisely the ingredients needed to bring about harmony. Recall Heraclitus's often quoted saying, quote, opposition brings concord, out of discord comes the fairest harmony, end quote. In this light, both Orpheus's singing and the movement of the river are in harmony. In their opposition comes attraction. Perhaps it could be said that song and flowing waters each possess an attraction and that together they are exponentially attractive. In their respective dynamisms is their continuance. Orpheus's song is only audible by its expression, its movement through time. The river too must run as it does, also marking time. A characteristic of life is movement, and the singing of song and the flowing of river waters are symbolic of this. Recall another of Heraclitus's saying, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man, end quote. Though song may be said to immortalize Orpheus and his beloved Eurydice, it is water, here in a more overtly dynamic form, that ensures Orpheus's burial. Indeed, with his demise, water could do nothing but bury what remained of his body, his singing head, which is a symbol of song's continuance, here despite Orpheus's bodily death. We might also recognize water's allure in our fascination over its power to draw to a close the torturous life of this heroic bard. Water accompanies Orpheus in various mythopoetic contexts. In Euripides' work, Alcestis, Admetus declares to his wife, quote, had I the lips of Orpheus and his melody to charm the maiden daughter of Demeter and her lord, and by my singing win you back from death, I would have gone beneath the earth, and not the hound of Pluto could have stayed me, not the ferryman of ghosts, Charon at his oar. I would have brought you back to life, end quote. This was,
please, 3 more minutes.
Okay. I'm going to go forward a little bit here because I had one last myth that I treated. I want to at least get a little bit of it in. The Sirens. The mythical tale of Odysseus and the Sirens appear in Book 12 of the Odyssey. The Sirens are said to be 2 in number and 1 in song. Music also cooperates with water here in magnifying its deadly allure. Indeed, water would seem to conspire and coalesce with the siren's deadly song to bring about the demise of the sailors. And it is water that would be the initial allure to sailors. After all, a sailor might well be called a thalassophile or lover of the sea. Without the waters of the sea, a sailor is not a sailor. Water is also the medium by which their ships are said to crash upon the rocky shores of the untamed Sirenic island. As water and music via the Sirenic song coalesce, it is as if they become one in purpose. This amplifies the mystery that abounds in Homer's account of the sirens, whose island too holds a dark mystery. And it goes on, but I'll wrap up here, talking about the shores of their unnamed island. Thus, the doom associated actually with both myths, Orpheus and the sirens, via the powerful allure of music and water is unavoidable given the powerful allure that they possess. Ultimately, their dramatic ethos and inevitable doom may be understood to signify the inherently continuous flow of the life-death cycle. Thus, in a sense, the shores of this unnamed island, this foreboding place, become indistinguishable from those of Hades. So too is it that the source of the powerful energies behind wind, music, and water become indistinguishable from the source of the allure that transports souls beyond life's boundary. So just to wrap up here, in philosophy and myth, water in its multifarious manifestations and contexts is both sought after and feared. It is basic to considerations of the very origins of the world and of humanity and its civilizations. Thus, it is hardly surprising that water would be a major source of fascination and allure. Water's allure will ever continue to fascinate humans. Water is with us throughout our lives. We are never far from its elemental call, a call that draws us to itself and exponentially to all others. Our response to its attraction is innate, partly explaining our curiosity about and fascination with its nature, whether in scientific, philosophical, mythical, or countless other contexts. Broadly, it reflects a basic but no less profound observation that, at least here on Earth, with water, there is life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is very, very, very important topic. It's an existential thing you are talking about here. As I watch you talking, I saw some people having some sip of water, and I said, well, that's what we are talking about here.
Yes, I had the urge. I had the urge to sip some water myself, which I'm going to do right
also,
this
another
minute.
quick comment before I ask you to comment or ask questions is, as we talk about the importance of water, let's be reminded that climate change has been causing some trouble with drought in many places in the world.
Yes.
And so that means it's affecting this arcade, this originating principle or element that Tillis was talking about.
Yes.
Also, as we talk about water as very important, let's be reminded that in many developing countries, women's job, one of women's job, especially in rural area, is to make sure there is water, and they have to go distance to fetch water. So
Yes.
as we talk about water and its importance for our daily life, let's say thank you to those hardworking women who do this very important job. And having mentioned the women, happy Women's History Month, and more specifically for those who make sure there is water in houses in many places in the world, especially in Africa. Thank you. Any questions to the speaker? Question or comment?
There's one.
Nobody's thirsty.
Yeah, there's one.
Anybody thirsty needs water?
Joanne.
Joanne
Okay,
has
yes.
her hand up.
Yes, Anne.
Joanne has her hand up.
I'm unmuting. Thank you. Took me a while to unmute.
I could not say.
I read a fascinating book this year that Linda, you may know about, and thank you for that paper.
Thank you.
Amazing, amazing history of myth and philosophy. But I read a book called Water, a Biography, and I wonder if you have heard about it. It's by Giulio Boccoletti, who's Italian by birth, but has describes himself as British and American. And he works in climate change and all kinds of high level global issues. But the book is basically a study of water from literally the beginnings of the planet.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of it. But it's important here to recognize this. I mean, I sort of chopped off a lot of my paper because, as usual, I went too far beyond the time limit, and I was just trying to consolidate things. But yes, the whole what Zeki is bringing up, and this source that you're mentioning, this bibliographical source, does sort of beg the need for commentary on the crisis of water in our current day. Even if I'm addressing, ancient Greek myth, it's no matter. We're here now, and how does all of that in the end, when you're pulling it all together in what you're writing, you want to be able also to say something about a crisis of this magnitude, really. But thank you for that. It's a reminder.
Right.
It'd been a while ago that I think I had accessed a little bit of that book. Nothing substantial, and I can see where I should get back to it.
Well, he traces all of civilization through human connection to water. And for him, the critical move was when humans decided to go toward agriculture instead of nomadic life, because that tied them to water, that tied them to the need for water.
Yes.
And I just think I mean, in so many ways, it's an amazing study of the history of civilization.
Thank you for that. Yes, I do mention about the river cultures, and all across the different areas, with not least of which is the Nile,
right?
But others as well. But agriculture is the fundamental change in the way we think about water. That's what really does it. I mean, we always needed it, but with agriculture, it became a much more dire situation in terms of being able to figure out how best to get the water to, the farming process, basically. Thank you for that.
Yes, Anne.
Yes, thank you, Linda. Wonderful paper.
Thank you, Anne.
I want to hear the rest. But I just wondered, as you were presenting the myths, I thought of water as a great connector, the unifier. I mean, if we think of the myth of Odysseus, that's how you travel. The myth of Odysseus is primarily on water.
Correct.
With just the stops and the little islands. And then I was thinking of it as the unifier, even in symbology, because it's the symbol of the collective unconscious.
Yeah, wow, that's lovely. That part's lovely. The first part I had written about, but didn't get to read. Also in death, water is the transporter in death. You need the ferryman. You need Charon to transport the dead across the river. You need that boat. You need him at his oar to transport the souls beyond life, because water is implicated at every phase within this life-death axis. But now this secondary point that you mentioned, which is not secondary at all, is really quite profound. Would you mind expanding a little bit on what you just said on the last part?
Yes, if we take the Jungian symbolism, in Jungian psychoanalysis, the idea is that water represents the collective unconscious. Yes. So that when we are in the water, or when we go into the ocean of the water, we are relating to that which connects all our unconscious.
I love that. That's great. Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Anne.
Hello, John. You have something to say? Yeah, John.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ken. Thank you.
Good. Linda, thank you very much for your presentation. As you are talking, I kept on thinking that water is the earth. Yeah.
Yes.
Water waters the earth, gives it life and sustains it. You
Yes.
can now see the significance of the title for the series of these conferences, Geo-Aesthetics. Aesthetics takes us back to the earth, and because water waters the earth, aesthetics takes us to water and to the earth,
Yeah.
and it nourishes aesthetics. Thank you.
Well, if I may say, thank you for saying that. And yes, the water, or you really can't speak about water without speaking about the earth. I mean, our lives are possible because of the union of these things. And then that made me think of Fran's presentation, because I know that is Fran here? I don't know if she's, in any case, Fran, I know you've mentioned in the past and even today about the connection of the earth to humans and to art. And that's just, it's really a fundamental connection. So thank you both for bringing these things up.
Robert?
Thank you, Zeke, and thank you, Linda. I couldn't help but be stimulated to think of other things while you're presenting, especially as you mentioned Orpheus and his lyre or harp, and your affinity and scholarship of music. If I carry this forward with water, I've seen several instances of the resonance of water as it plays within and without us. But there was also times in history where the water harp came along, the glass harp came along. Think of all the parties you've been at with people drinking wine, and they spin their wet finger on the top of a goblet, and it starts to sing to them, right?
Yes.
Or if you think of, in Washington, there was a small building near the Capitol called the Summer House. And in its fountain underneath there, originally in the 1800s, it had a water calliope where the water moved over certain little things and made sounds. I'm just curious about the relationship between water and music and how that might resonate in and through us, and your opinion on that.
Wow. Wow. Well,
I mean, not that we have all day, but
No. I mean, look, the short answer is, I'd taken courses in physics, being a music major in my youth, right? And in those courses, I was amazed to realize how many of the elements and substances, not all elements, are interacting in consort. It's difficult to extract any one of them and say, aha, here's the cause for this. It's sort of these different interactions, very complex actually, that we don't account for. That's one of the reasons I mentioned that, again, not that I wanted to go on about chemistry, but, that on a daily basis, we're not necessarily very aware of the attraction, between these different hydrogen and oxygen atoms, and how that creates a situation where their bonding renders water a solvent, that causes most substances to dissolve. That's why if you leave a pan in the sink, for example, maybe you cooked something and there's some food that got stuck on it. Well, you just put some water on it, leave it overnight, and the next day, gee, that pan got scrubbed overnight. There are all these phenomena that go into the properties of these elements, and we don't know them. We don't understand. We understand them in scientific terms, but do we, on an everyday basis? Typically, are we mindful of these things? As we go about our everyday lives? No, but they're complex. It's usually not a simple matter. Sound is energy, and energy manifests in so many different ways, right? We have light energy, right? Heat energy, sound, and so forth. And any one of these, can be, you can separate it out and you can talk about it, but typically it's not the energy in and of itself. Just like it's not water itself that creates any one thing. It's, even Narcissus's reflection, right? It wouldn't occur if the other atmospheric conditions weren't available, if the sunlight wasn't just so, and if the water didn't have just a certain, calmness to it, thanks to the environmental conditions and so forth, so to just say water's reflection, kind of, all right, that's okay, but there's so much more to it,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, depending on how we are with time and whether or not we are going to have a break, I have no control. So please let me know what to do next, a break or no break. Question to the organizers.
Let's have a break.
A break?
Yes, please.
So how long?
10 minutes.
10-minute break?
Yes.
So let's say we come back at 4.
Yes.
And at 4, we have 3 presentations.
Okay, yeah.
Like
Yes.
Jeanette, okay, I guess we can get back to work. Is the following order okay from everybody? Jeanette, Matir, Nisha, and then Bongre Siok. Is that order good for you?
Yeah.
If necessary, we can change. Okay.
Good.
So if there's no objection, I'm going to introduce the next speaker, who is Professor Jeanette Matir. Give me a second, please. Professor Matir is a photographer and video artist. She received her BA in English and Modern Studies from the University of Virginia and her MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. In 2007, she joined the faculty of Towson University, where she is currently professor of photo imaging and chair of the Department of Art and Design, Art History, Art Education. Please join me in welcoming our sister chairperson and CEO of this great department, Jeanette.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here and let's hope it works. Share screen. Okay, share, and then I have to find. Can you all see this? You guys see the screen?
Pardon?
Hello? Can you guys see the screen?
We see you.
Yes, you can see the screen?
With
We
you
see
in
you,
it,
but not
right?
to share. You have to share a screen.
Is there another screen?
I don't think so. Hold on. Share screen.
Are you talking about your background?
Is that working?
No,
Okay.
Click little green rectangle in the middle of the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, that's what I'm clicking. I guess I'll try window. Maybe that'll do it. Can you see it now?
No.
No?
sometimes does the host have to make you a co-host or something like that?
Maybe that's not open right now. That's right, Joanne. Who is host today, this afternoon?
So when you hit the green square, the green share screen at the bottom, you click which window or program you want to share, and then in the bottom right, click the blue share.
I mean, I'm hitting entire screen, and when I hit it and choose it and I hit share, it doesn't seem like it's coming up for you guys.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh wait, grant browser access to screen recording.
Are you on a Mac?
Yeah.
So if you have not shared screen before in a Mac, what happens is you probably didn't take that other step, and that's what she did. Now the Mac is recognizing the permissions.
Is it working now?
It is.
No, that's Marungi
That's
share.
Marungi's.
Oh my God. So
I'm not sure what just happened here. I just lost something. Oh, here we go.
Hold on a second. It says
it's a permissions thing, and what's going to happen is that it's going to require you to log off and log back on. So in the meantime, for the efficiency of this conference, what you should probably do is email Andrew Rosenblum. Since you're a Towson University employee, he is in the directory, and then he can share the screen for you so that you can have your presentation shared.
okay. Why don't we switch and let the next person go? And
Hello?
Actually, this might fix it, but
If you want, we can go to the next person.
yeah, I think so.
I can
Okay,
go.
let's see if Dr. Nisha Rator is around.
No.
Dr. Nisha?
She's not here.
If
Oh,
not,
she's
we
here.
can move
No,
to.
she's here.
Huh?
Bongrai.
I can do, but Nisha, I don't know.
Can we move to Dr. Bongre Siok?
Yeah, I can do that. Yep.
That way
Okay.
we don't lose time, okay?
Hello.
What's the, huh?
I'm Nisha here.
So what do we do now? Should we go back to Nisha?
Okay, I think I may have fixed it.
Huh?
I may have fixed it. Hold on.
Okay.
Can you see my screen now?
So on a Mac, if you fix it, you do have to sign out and sign back into the Zoom session.
Okay. Bye. I'll be back.
Oh, okay, so should we move to Dr. Nisha? Should I introduce you? If you are ready?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you. Thank you. Dr. Nisha Ratore is an associate professor, Department of History, Agra College, Agra, Uttar Pradesh, India. She did her BA from Osmania University, MA, MPhil from University of Hyderabad, Central University, and earned her PhD from Kurukshetra University. Dr. Nisha has 29 research papers published on various aspects in the well-known journals and books. Her area of interest are caste, class, religion, temple art, historiography, Awad peasant movement, Gandhi, etc. She has published a book titled The Glory of Awad in the Nawabi Regimes. Another book is titled Classes and Castes in the Awad Agrarian Society. As an academician, she has presented numerous research papers in national and international conferences and workshops, including the Towson University, Towson, Maryland, US. She also visited Athens and presented paper on Piro and the Indian thought from historical point of view at the international conference organized by International Center of Philosophy and Interdisciplinary Research, Athens, Greece. In India, she has delivered lectures on invitations from various institutions. More importantly, Dr. Nisha is a life member of the Indian History Congress. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nisha.
Hello. 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 Thank you very much for introducing me. And thank you, Professor John Murangi, who invited me for this conference. And good afternoon to everybody present in the conference. I am starting my paper now. I have to share the screen. Hello?
Yes.
I have to share the screen. I have to share the screen of my pictures. Shall I start? Shall I start now?
Yes, please.
The title of my paper is Erotic Art of Konarks and Temple. Actually, Konark is a place in India where this famous temple is situated. After 600 AD, due to the invasions of white Huns and later by the Muslims, Mathura art, that is the Buddhist art, was nearly wiped out from the north. But the Hindu art survived and continued its march towards the north and northeast in Bundelkhand and Orissa, respectively. Khajuraho temples are in Bundelkhand and Konark Sun temple is in Orissa, an Indian state. Khajuraho temples were built during 950 AD to 1150 AD. Originally, there were more than 80 temples in Khajuraho. Now some are left. Konark Sun temple is a single one. It was built during 1236 AD to 1264 AD. The temples of Khajuraho and Konark are listed in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. They are reputed for sensuous erotic sculptures. Like the temple of Khajuraho, the Sun temple has an abundance of sculptures that show sex, wealth, religion, and the release from the cycle of birth. Konark temple is far superior than the temples of Khajuraho in both architecture and sculptures. The paper on the erotic temple art of Khajuraho was presented in the 6th Geo-Aesthetics conference held at Towson University in 2014. Therefore, this paper is restricted to the Konark Sun temple. The name Konark is derived from the word Kona, that is corner, and Arka, that is sun. It is also known as Arkakshetra, the area of the sun. There are three images of the sun god positioned to catch the rays of the sun at dawn, noon, and sunset. Konark temple is also called the Black Pagoda by the European sailors. There are many legends regarding the construction of Konark Sun Temple, but almost all the historians agree that Narasimha was the builder of this most reputed temple. Wait, most reputed temple, but almost all the historians agree that Narasimha was the builder of this most reputed temple. According to Benjamin Rowland, quote, the final achievement of Odishan builders is the Surya Deval, a temple of the sun at Konark. This sanctuary was erected in the reign of Narasimha Deva, unquote. He belonged to the dynasty of Eastern Gangas, which reigned from 1028 to 1434 AD. The last known king of this dynasty ruled until 1425. The territory ruled by the dynasty consisted of the entire modern day Orissa state and the major parts of the Indian states. There are three important points to remember about the rulers of this dynasty. Firstly, actually, this is the a part of this temple is shown. Firstly, all of them were great builders and patrons of arts and religion. That is why, during the 4th centuries of their rule, magnificent temples were built at Bhubaneswar, that is Lingaraj Temple, Puri Jagannath Temple, and Konark Sun Temple. The temples of Ganga period rank among the masterpieces of Hindu architecture. Secondly, they were responsible for bringing the culture and art style of South India to their area because Orissa is situated in the eastern India. Finally, they flourished during the period of religious upheaval. It is noted that cost was no consideration for the construction of Sun Temple. The stones used for making this temple were brought from outside India. This shows that India used to trade with other countries even at that time. Three types of stones, namely chlorite, laterite, and condylite, were used for building this temple. But the king fixed the revenue of 1200 villages to cover the cost, and 12,000 excellent workers worked for 12 long years. Why was this temple built at Konark? Perhaps there was a temple at Konark which had fallen, so he built a new one on the same place. It is dedicated to the old god Surya and to the new god Vishnu. That is why it is called Vishnu Surya Temple. There are several explanations for the construction of Sun Temple. The most acceptable is this: the king was a great monarch and had won great victories over the Muslim invaders in the battlefield. He invaded southern Bengal in 1243, defeated its Muslim ruler, and captured his capital. To celebrate his victory and to give his thanks to the powers, that he decided to build a temple whose like none had existed earlier. According to Kanwarlal, this temple might have been meant to represent both a shrine and the Kirti Stamba of that great monarch. Unquote. Kirti Stamba means monument in memory of victories. Unfortunately, Narsimha I, who got constructed this temple, died in 1264. If he had lived more, he would have constructed a few more wonders, that is, temples in his state. In the Konark Sun Temple, architecture and sculpture had been harmonized into one whole. This is actually sculptures are shown on the walls of temple. These sculptures are carved on the temple itself. They are not separated from the wall of the temple, and they are all forms, erotic and non-erotic. And these walls of these panels are so beautifully carved out. It is said that no part of the temple is, is uncarved. Everything, small or big, is carved out. In the Konark Sun Temple, harmonized, we can say that architecture was sculpture and vice versa, as we can see on this picture. Due to its beauty, the temple is considered as the miracle of architecture as well as a miracle of sculpture. Regarding the beauty of this temple, W. W. Hunter says, quote, it concentrates in itself the accumulated beauties of four architectural centuries among the Hindus, unquote. The sculptures on its external walls are extraordinary of the erotic character. These are related to feminine beauty. It is considered as one of the noblest monuments of Indian medieval art. According to Ananda Kumara Swami, quote, the temple is not only unique as a temple but is in itself both architecturally and in the details of its sculpture, one of the noblest monuments of Indian medieval art. Unquote. It is one of the highest watermark in the history of Indian art, as says O.C. Ganguly. Quote, the Konark Shrine not only marks the culmination of the Kalinga style in architecture and sculpture, but marks one of the highest watermark in the history of Indian art. Unquote. Once it was a temple of sun and is now a temple of art. The Sun Temple is built in the shape of a huge chariot of sun god. The design of the chariot gives two important components, the wheels and the horses. Actually, this wheel is shown on this picture. Actually, there are 24 wheels of this chariot, which are very much carved out. Both these are well conceived and worked out by the sculptors. Two lions guard the entrance of temple. The chariot temple, each line is shown. That line picture. Each line is shown in act of crushing an elephant. That different picture. That is. वो वाली picture नहीं है. You know, no. On the entrance it was. Yeah, but entrance के ऊपर Each line uh, is shown in act of crushing an elephant under each elephant is present in the present in the human body. The elephant represents money and the lion represents pride. It symbolizes that a man should not become overly dependent on money and should reduce his desire for money. That the chariot seems to be in motion and the wheels show movement. This whole idea of the chariot of the sun moving across the sky drawn by horses has been very well executed. It had 24 wheels, 12 on either side. 24 wheels indicate 24 hours of a day. Each wheel is a huge monolithic piece of carving. The size of each wheel is 9 feet 8 inches in diameter with a rim of 8 to 10 inches and 16 spokes which crisscross and which are alternatively thick and thin. 8 major spokes signify 3 hours period of a day. The spokes are an important part of the wheel. The flat surface of wheel indicates beautiful creeper crawl, scroll work with several insects, animals, birds carved as part of the scroll and making a wonderful design. These wheels, there are 24 wheels. They are very important of this temple. Deer, swan, and lovely little elephants are also found on the rim of the wheel. The spokes control help in the movement and therefore regulate it. Within this interplay of movement and its regulation, its controlling power, there is need and importance of the erotic. The erotic activity is part of life, and the movement of wheel would not be completed. Human life would not be meaningless, and no realization without the erotic activity. It is part of the universal movement of the cosmic rhythm. According to the tantric doctrine, that is art of sex, all movement is a result of this. The wheel of life, of universe, will not move and will not be without the erotic activity. There is literally not a millimeter on the entire wheel which is not carved and carved exquisitely. The erotic figures are also carved on the wheel. The wheel is rich symbol of Indian mythology. It is the symbol of life, the symbol of time, is the symbol of movement, is the symbol of fullness and perfection. As a child grows and becomes mature, he or she must experience the erotic activity. Human life is not fulfilled and complete without this, and so on the spokes we find this representation of the erotic activity we find. The wheel of monarch stands for time because the chariot is that of the sun god, and we measure time in accordance with the light of the sun. It receives first light from the sun. It is done by 7 finely carved horses, horses. Each horse represents a day of the week. Regarding these, Deva Prasad Ghosh points out that, quote, the 24 wheels of this chariot carved on the northern and southern sides of the Vimana and Jagmona. Vimana is the main temple's top, and this Jagmona is the assembly hall with their rich and delicate decorations, and the 7 horses, 4 on the north and 3 on the south of the flight of steps in front of the Jagmona, have evoked the wonder of the world. Unquote. Therefore, it is said generally that if the Sun Temple is a miracle of art, one can say without exaggeration that the wheels of Konark are a miracle within the miracle. It seems as the chariot is pulled by a set of 7 spirited horses from heaven to earth and vice versa. The sculptures of Sun Temple are uniformly excellent. They are divided into 6 categories. First, there is excellent portrayal of animal figures. The elephants and the horses at Konark show an amazing liveliness. Secondly, most impressive series of sculptures is that of the Apsaras, who grace the 2 lower stories of the roof of the Jagmohan. Third noteworthy category is that of the sculptures carved out of green chloride. The fourth category is the Wheel of Konark. The Wheel of Konark is perhaps the finest example of any wheel in art. The fifth category is that of the beautiful women of the gods. About them there is an air of vitality and zest for life, vigor and sensuousness, which makes them worthy of heroes. Sixth category, leave it. Sixth category is the erotic scenes. On the Sun Temple, the erotic sculptures simply simply stupendous. They make perhaps the most important part of the total decoration. The erotic couple symbolizes the aesthetic ex- uh, bliss experienced by the separated soul of man when reunited with the divine. These erotic sculptures are there because the temple represents everything which the universe contains. Additionally, the representation aims at putting forth all which the sun will see during its journey while it looks upon all the religions. Nothing can be concealed from the light of the sun and to his impartial eye. All is just what it is, and nothing is good or bad in itself. Everything is part of life, is part of universe, and as such, everything is as it should be. From the Vedic period, that is very early period of Indian history, that is around 1500 BC onwards, the belief in the universe as the outcome of cosmic union between the male and the female had been a fundamental aspect of the Hindu faith. And from the Atharva Veda downwards, hundreds of texts had been written on the elaboration of the play of function of sex within the scheme admitted by the Hindu religion. The Kam Sutra, that is text on sex, within the scheme admitted by the Kam Sutra text on sex, that is Vasana, was only a later means of previous erotic literature. Erotic sculptures are carved on other famous medieval temples also. They are not only the characteristics of medieval Hindu temples, they are also found in Buddhist architecture. At Nagarjunakonda, a famous center of Buddhist architecture and sculpture, there are several panels showing erotic scenes. A careful survey of sculptures at Khajuraho, Konark, and other reputed places or temples will depict how closely the artists in many cases have followed the sutras of Hindu texts. The erotic sculptures stands for a most important activity of life. It is very source of life. At Konark, there is complete symphony of the sex act, the complete Kamsastra, that is science of sex, sculpted in stone. There is frank exhibition of things which humanity generally hides away. The Sun Temple is fully decorated with tremendous variety and loveliness. Fully decorated with tremendous variety and loveliness of the sculptures like mythical animals, geometric motifs, people, images of wars and warriors, etc. But Konark Temple has acquired maturity in erotic sculptures over the erotic sculptures of Khajuraho temples. According to Kanwarlal, quote, Konark's erotic sculpture is far superior to the work at Khajuraho, unquote. The sculpture shows couples in every form of erotic play. These figures represent the sexual intercourse, positions assumed by the gods and their female counterparts. There are scenes of human animal intercourse and of complicated groups of people involved in sexual diversions. The female figures are remarkable for their sensuous modeling, pulsating with human emotions in a variety of gestures and rhythmic actions. Much of the Konark temple is now in ruins. Many people believe that the temple was damaged due to natural disasters. Some believe that the Muslims destroyed it, but the real reason is still unknown. At present, this Konark temple is around 100 feet high. In original form, it was 200 feet high. The Jagmohan is the only part of the temple which remains as a whole unit. Jagmohan is the assembly hall. The architectural pieces of the temple are preserved in the museum nearby it, which is looked after by Archaeological Survey of India. One complete wheel of the chariot is kept in the museum. The structures and elements that have survived are reputed for their intricate artwork, iconography, and themes including erotic scenes. Surprisingly, the deity of this temple is never worshipped because the chief architect's son committed suicide at the time of completion of this temple by jumping from the temple into river. Since that time, the temple was considered unholy. Erotic sculptures on the temples do not stop worship, but the mutilation of idols in the sanctum stops worship. To conclude, the Sun Temple is only assumed if it had been complete and intact at the Kandariya, Kandariya Mahadev temple or the Lingaraj temple or the Taj Mahal of Agra. It was not among India's best, but the best she had. Here I will tell you about Kandariya Mahadev temple was one of the temples of Khajuraho. Actually, this temple was very big. It was having nearly 900 sculptures, and size of the sculpture was 2.5 feet to 3 feet in height. Actually, this reference I am giving, this was the biggest temple in Khajuraho. The sculpture of Sun Temple has no parallel in any other known building. Whatever one may say about the religious aspect of the Konark temple, most of the people come to visit Konark for having a glimpse of its sensuous, erotic, non-erotic art and architecture. The visitors share the attitude of an artist. For them, the external walls of Konark temple are like the art galleries of our modern times. Thank you very much. Once I will show all this, I will explain some part of these pictures. This temple is very huge actually, but many parts of these temples are ruined now. So original part of this temple is this. Deity is always kept in this part, and this small this gate is seen here. This temple is having, you have seen just now, a wheel, a size of the wheel, 24 wheels, from which we can understand how big this temple will be in a form of chariot. This people, deity is always inside the sanctum. Deity or God. These are actually sculptures. There are mythical animals and apsaras, beautiful women, and some are in erotic form. Wheels. Here we can see two wheels of this temple, and we can see the work, the carving on the walls. Actually, this is part of carving is part of the wall only. It is not nothing is separate. Everything is part of this wall. Therefore, we say that architecture and sculpture are the same. This is a mythical animal. This wheel. It is looking small, but big size, and some sculptures are not clearly seen because these photographs I have downloaded due to this COVID and Omicron. I could not go to Risa recently. If these Here we can see erotic sculptures of Konark temple. And one thing I feel when I studied these Khajuraho temples sculptures and Khajuraho temple, they were 80s, and they were built during a long period by many rulers. This temple was built in a given time and by a single person, and very huge temple. So many scholars say that this temple is superior in everything, in art, in sculptures, in architecture. Really, when I studied about this temple, I found that this 30 minutes or 20 minutes presentation is not enough to talk about this temple. So many things about this temple are there. Means it needs lot of time to study also and to present. These all walls, these different parts of the temple, because one this whole temple cannot be shown in a single time. These I talked about lions that who were on the gate of the temple. They are shown here, and they were crushing elephants. Lion was representing pride, elephants were representing wealth. There are sculptures of varieties. These horses. We can see horse. There are 7 horses actually. This chariot was led by 7 horses, spirited horses. So we can see they are means they are seen even now in the spirited form. These are some mythical animals. Elephants. There are many elephants because elephants signify wealth. This is portrait of image of sun god. This is erotic scene. Elephants. This we can the architectural work of the temple. This side, right side, and this some god's portrait is there. Means so uh, beautiful work, very in a small. Means everything was kept in mind of the sculptors. That they kept in mind everything should be so fine. There are sculptures which are not one of God sculptures is there, another are apsaras means beautiful woman. These are the platform of the temple, which is decorated with a variety of sculptures. This is the temple we are seeing today. Wheel. This is wheel of life and karma, which in these are musicians and dancers sculptures. This is some broken portrait. Sun gods. This is some erotic scenes. This other side of the temple we can see because there are 24 wheels, 12 one side, 12 other side. This is male and female of snakes. I think finished, no? Horse. We can see more clearly the sculpture of horse. Means every part of house, this horse is carved out so beautifully. These are erotic sculptures. This is this is the picture of sunrise from inside the Konark temple. From is from this God's God is there inside the sanctum. This happens only in 200 once in a 200 years. Last time it happened in 2016 on 4th December. The sun rises from the inside. Thank you. Now- Hello, my presentation is finished. And one thing I will, if there is time, I want to say that means always scholars are comparing this one temple with 80 temples which were at Khajuraho. Means in everything, in sculptures, in area, means whatever we could not find in 80 temples of Khajuraho, we find in this one temple. This is the greatness of this temple. And because of this COVID and Omicron, I could not go to this temple recently, so I could not get decent pictures of this temple. This is for this I feel very sorry. If I would have gone, I have taken my own pictures, it would have been more clear. So pictures were downloaded, some of pictures were not very clear. So presentation is finished, but I am not so satisfied. 30 minutes are not enough for this temple. So in future, I will do more work on this temple because the rulers of this dynasty were very big builders and very rich. Means they brought the stones from outside and then they constructed 3 big temples of Orissa. Lingaraj temple at Bhubaneswar, Jagannath Puri temple at Puri, and this San Konak temple and one temple at Jaipur, which is devoted to this goddess Durga. So means 4 big temples. The rulers from 1000 to They constructed these four temples. And there is one thing more. This was the period when Muslims invaded India, and these rulers, they countered them. And one thing more is there in Indian history and in Hindu art. After this 14 or 1500, when Muslims fully they got settled in India and they become ruler of India, the Hindu art was completely finished. We do not find any further construction of Hindu art. Hindu arts was full means developed from ancient times to till 1400. I think this was the last temple which the builders got constructed. Thank you. This is my presentation.
Zakay, we can't hear you.
Yes,
I was just telling Zakay that we couldn't hear him. You're muted.
I am muted. No, I'm not muted.
Yeah, that's the problem. I forgot to do something. Okay, I was saying, asking if you are ready with some comments and all questions. Very powerful images.
Yes, yes.
Yes, Bongre?
Yes, thank you for the good presentation. It's very great. I have just simple question. Whenever I see Indian architecture, I was really amazed by the wonderful forms and patterns. The question I have is, seems like every available space is filled with some patterns and some kind of structures. It almost looks like there's some horror of emptiness. There's no empty space, just putting everything in available space. So the question is why? Why these medieval Indians put a lot of things in a given space, not leaving any empty available space, just putting everything. Do you have any reason for that?
Actually, this temple, they always considered the house of the god. House of the god, and life is complete life, the universe, complete universe is, they have taken all the activities which we find in the universe. So this concept, this everything which exists in the universe should be on the temple. And temple, they did not consider as temple, they considered as god is living in this temple. Because some aspect of this temple I could not describe, like this temple is having a place where deity is kept. Second, this Jagmohan, which I said again and again, it was assembly hall, because people before going to deity, they were waiting there. Then there is this Native Bhavan, where even today musicians and every kind of thing was there. Then there is called one this bhog, means there was means food for God was cooked there, and every morning and evening they were given first food, then that will be distributed to the people who come there. Means they did not consider God just as God, they took in lively form. So everything of life human, therefore one will be surprised that so much erotic things were shown on the temple. And surprisingly, erotic activity or erotic sculptures did not stop the worship of the temple. Means people are worshipping inside. I saw here there is problem in the beginning that chief architect's son committed suicide, so it was considered unholy. But I tell you, I visited Khajuraho temples, where I saw that people were worshipping. Only those temples were not worshipped where this idol was mutilated. What Muslim invaders did, they got mutilated the many idols of the Hindus in the sanctum. They were not worshipping. Means erotic activity is part of universe. Our life will not be there if erotic activity is not there. So in Hindu temple is not considered only a temple. In our, I told you that there are 100 texts which deal with this Kam Sutra, means science of sex. The Vatsayana is only later book. Before that, 100 books. So means in Hindu philosophy, this erotic activity is part of universe. It must be there, and all kinds of activities which universe contains should be there. Means later on you will see in temples these real women were kept as dancers. They were known as Devidasi. That they used to dance to make God happy. God is not living, but feelings were kept all such as God is alive. So this is the thing that everything is put. And one thing more, in India, this real builders were the craftsmen. In India, craftsmen were from a community. Whole community was busy in this work, specialized in this work. Not that some, because in India, due to caste system, due to Varna system, like there were 4 Varnas: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Means
Very
profession of,
interesting, very interesting, very interesting. Let's see
profession
if
of
somebody else have something to say in appreciation of the what we watched. Any comment or question? If not, I have a quick question that was not necessarily covered by the presentation. I know that one of your areas of interest and specialization is caste system. And I was wondering if you have a comment to make about the current state of the caste system in India. What has been done? What is still a job in progress? Very quickly.
Yes, caste in India were always very important. Even I give you one example. During British period, the people of low caste were exploited more in comparison to the people of high caste. Even the people of high caste paid less rent act, because I have worked on the peasant studies. Less rent in comparison to the this high caste. Therefore, in India, class struggles were dominated by caste. They were not. Firstly, people from dominant caste united together. Dominant in, we can say, in quantity. Today, our politics is very much dominated by caste system. Hello, dominated by
Okay,
caste.
I think we are running a little bit late, so maybe we can stop here. And if somebody has a question, please contact the speaker. We already presented Professor Jene, and I wonder if she's ready to jump in.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Dr. Nisha.
thank you. I'm going to try this. I'm hoping that it will work. Let's see. Okay. Can you see my screen? Oh,
I don't think so.
not working. Oh my God. Okay. Could you just move ahead and I will fix it one way or the other for the last presentation.
Should I move to the next?
Yeah, I'm going to have to move to a different computer. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, let's move to Dr. Bongre Siok. He saved us some time by not providing a lengthy bio sketch. So all I can say is he is based at Alvernia University, and anything else you want to add to his bio, please feel free to add to your presentation. Thank you. Dr. Bongre Siok.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me see. Let me share my screen. Okay, so can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you for inviting me to give my presentation. Murungi and others, really great to see you again, even though this is online venue, but I'm very excited to give my presentation. Thank you. My talk today is about affecting presence and the openness of embodied sensitivity. The title sounds really scary, but it's not scary. It's about the presence and absence. So here is, okay. Here is general description of my presentation. This paper discusses the lived experience of affecting presence throughout embodied and imaginative openness. Affecting presence is not the physical presence of individual objects. Rather, it is the interactive projection and the imagination of the body in the world of lived experience. To explain this type of presence, the paper analyzes how affecting presence is felt and experienced in the Kyoto Ryoanji Temple's Japanese garden, Vincent van Gogh's pair of shoes, and John Cage's famous 4 minutes 33 seconds. The best way to appreciate these works is to understand a special type of presence, not the presence of particular objects, but the presence of holistic openness revealed through the lived experience of the embodied here and now. In this context, affecting presence is the absence of objective reality in exchange for interactive and open reality in the world of cohabitation and cohabilitation between transcendence and immanence of the body as affective sensitivity. This type of presence can be experienced by embodied affordances and affectances. So to begin with, I draw this diagram to make things easier for you to understand. So I'm going to talk about different types of presence, presence in presence, PIP, and presence in absence. I'm focusing more about the second type of presence. And this type of presence is basically absence. Something is not there, but we feel the presence of that thing. And it's possible because of the imaginative openness of the body through the affordances and affectances. So one of the implications of this type of presence, presence in absence, is that art is more than form, shape, and sound. It's the image and its embodied imaginative openness of the body. So that's the big picture. And I'm going to give you some specific examples. So to begin with, I said there are two different types of presence. There's presence 1 and presence 2. And presence 1 is the idea that there's something presenting and it's actually presenting in front of you. So presence is opposite of absence, and presence is not in absence. But the second type of presence is where presence is actually existing in absence. So this is called the PIA, and presence is not opposite of absence, and presence is in absence. So there are two interesting types of presence, and I'm going to give you some examples. So for example, presence 1 is the presence of actual thing. It's a real encounter. And this is one wonderful example of the presence of presence by Marina Abramovich. And she had a performance event in 2010 in MoMA, New York. And the idea here is that you go there to sit in front of this artist for 1 minute. And that's it. That's all you need to do. But you have to remain silent for 1 minute. And that's the whole thing about the presence. And I'm going to share some screen, perhaps going back to screen and show you what is actually happening there. Let me see. Let me just pull this out. Okay, I guess one. Sorry about that. Yeah, this one. Okay, so hopefully I can play this without any issues. So can you?
What is so beautiful about the MoMA performance?
So can you see the video right now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
She's treating actually every human being she is encountered with the same attention and same respect. That's pretty shocking. And some people are shocked by this, and some people anyway think they deserve this attention and they are finally where they should be. And others fall in love with her.
There's so many different reasons why people come to sit in front of me. Some of them they're angry, some of them curious, some of them just want to know what happened. Some of them, they're really open and you feel incredible pain. So many people have so much pain. When they're sitting in the front of me, it's not about me anymore. It's very soon, I'm just the mirror of their own self.
Somebody told me the other day that for most masterpieces, people stand in front of it for 30 seconds. Mona Lisa, 30 seconds. People come and sit here all day.
The world is moving.
Okay, I'm going to stop for the sake of time. Sorry about that. I'm going back to my screen once again. Okay, so this really shows the power of presence. You go there and you feel the whole atmosphere, and that's what she did. Okay, so now going to presence two. Presence two is presence in absence. It sounds really metaphorical, but it actually happens. Presence two can be felt open vividly in physical absence. Presence two can be observed in many works of art, and it sometimes can transcend the limitation of the medium, visual representation, or sound, etc. And this is just a brief description of how is this possible. So presence two is an image created by embodied sensitivity. That's what I think. And this type of presence can be felt because of the openness of the body, which is the ability to go beyond what is physically given. So that's imaginative and it's open. The body is not just physical structure and dimension. The body does not just interact with the world through physical processes of sensory motor interaction. However, body has imaginative openness through affordances, which is the understanding things from the perspective of possibility of physical interaction, and affectances, understanding things from perspective of the possibility of feeling, that invite, invigorate, enlive the presence in absence. So because of this embodied mode of imaginative openness of the body, we can experience the presence even in absence of physical objects and events. So, for example, to explain affordances and affectances, for example, when you look at this, what do you think and what do you feel? So in terms of affordances, when people see this, they imagine this kind of physical activity. And the other side of the picture here is disembodied perception, which is objective dimension. These are different shapes and sizes. But if we have body instantly creating this imaginative activity to understand what's going on in that kind of space. And in terms of affectances, it's the possibility of sensation and feelings. And for example, this is a cup of coffee, and we can instantly connect to this object through affordances, which is possibility of holding, and affectances, possibility of smelling and drinking. And another example for bread, in terms of affordances, we look at that and we look at that as object of interaction, pushing and pulling and holding, but also we can also smell it and taste it and eating it, which is affectances. So these are different possibilities and imaginative openness that we engaging with object and events in the external world. Example, presence two. This is Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto, Japan. It's minimalist dry garden, Japanese style. And when you look at this, there's nothing much going on. It's emptiness. So it's something is not there, but we fully experience some kind of presence because of affordances and affectances. Another example, the Salk Institute, San Diego, California, the architect Louis Kahn built this kind of structure. Here you see huge emptiness in the front facade. And that's emptiness, that's absence, but it's really adding and helping this whole structure of the architecture. Another example, Vincent van Gogh's painting. Here we don't see any of the owner's body, the feet or his life or her life. Nothing is there, but we look at this painting, we instantly connect us to the person, the owner of the shoes, life and the situation. So that's another wonderful example of presence in absence. Another example by sculptor by Henry Moore. He had these kind of pieces, and if you look at the center, you see the empty core. There's nothing there, but it's just nothing, but it's not nothing. There's something there and really delivering strong message to us. So that's another example of presence in absence. And René Magritte, décalcomanie, and again, presence is not the opposite to absence. Presence and absence is really presenting at the same time in this wonderful painting. What about music? We go to music, we have John Cage's work, 4 minutes, 33 seconds. Nothing there. It's just devoid of any musical notes. The question is this music or not? It's a really paradoxical question. And this is front cover, so you don't see anything. And we actually have a performance of this piece, believe it or not, by Berlin Philharmonic, directed by Kirill Petrenko. And in this piece, John Cage shows that music is not just an art of sound. It can be an art of silence, because sound runs out. There's no sound, musical experience and musical image, it does not run out. It's still there in the middle of the silence. So I'm just give a quick shot of what is actually happened in that performance. Sorry, yeah, it's here. I'm going back, sorry about going back and forth. You see, yes, this, yeah, no, not this one, sorry, where is that? Let me close this. Sorry about going back and forth. Yes, this is the one. And I'm going back to, yes, this one. Okay, so now you see how that silent piece is. And I'm going towards the end. Yes, so that's how the piece is performed. So you probably hear silence, but again, it's the imaginative openness of the body that can help us to appreciate this kind of music. So years ago, the famous conductor Sergio Celibidache, who said that music is not sound. And in connection to this, we can understand why music is not just the sound. It's not sound, it's not just the musical notes, it's musical imagery through the openness of the body, and that can include silence. Another example of this type of situation in music is famous Ludwig van Beethoven's piece, the Egmont Overture, Opus 84. And we see huge gap of silence in the middle of this piece. And that kind of silence is just a lack of music. No, it's not lack of music. It's actually music is going on through the form of absence in presence. So amazing musical image of complete silence followed by a tense but inspiring sequence of volcanic exaltation that commemorates the heroic sacrifice and spiritual victory of the Count of Egmont against the oppression of the French Empire, basically Napoleon's French Empire. And Kurt Wengler, a conductor of this piece, his interpretation of this musical image in the pitch dark silence brings the musical presence even in the absence of musical notes. So let's just look at that to feel that kind of silence in music. And I'm going back to my, let me see, yes, this one. And I'm going to go back to, okay, where is that? Yes, this is one. Okay, so I'm just choose that part of the music, so it's not going to be that long. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. For the sake of time, I have to go back to again. Sorry about that. So that is one piece that I found very interesting because there's a huge gap in the middle of this piece. But again, music still goes on because of this musical imagery is still there. One thing I like to say is I have these examples from Western European classical music. I love to see some other examples, music from different cultures, but it's just right now, these are the kind of examples I have, so sorry about that. Now, the other one is another interesting situation. Here is, we have broken.
Attention, please. You have like 4 minutes or so.
Yeah, that's okay. I can.
And depending on the situation with Professor Matier, you can go on, but let me see. Is Dr. Matier there?
I'm here, and I think I solved the problem. So
you solved the problem. So we still have time to see your presentation, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Dr.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm aware of the time. So in this case, this is famous symphony by Bruckner, Symphony 4, which is romantic, and that's one of the famous piece. There's interesting at the end of the music. So music completely ends. That's it. And after that, there's something happened. And officially, that's not part of the symphony, but it seems as if the music's still going on, even after the last note is played. So this is the last one I have today. So let me see if I can show you this thing, and I'm going to end my presentation. Okay, I think I just close this, and let me go to my thing. Where is that? Yeah, this one. So I'm going to, sorry, I'm going to play that. Let me see, it's here. So the thing happened is you really have paying attention to the end, and you're probably seeing something. So I'm gonna start from here. Okay, so thank you very much. And this is one example where I love to share with you about the silence in absence in presence and silence in music. So just quickly wrapping up, this is really the last slide. So we have two different types of presence, presence in presence and presence in absence. And I talk more about the second type of presence, And this is not just metaphor. No, it's really happening, and it's possible because of the open imaginative ability of the body. And that's what I have today. Thank you very much.
Okay, very quickly, any question or comment before we move to the last? As you digest the information, Robert.
Very quickly, thank you, Bankri. I always look forward to your talks, and they're magical. Your diagrams are wonderful. Thinking about sound, you know, Simon and Garfunkel have a song called "The Sounds of Silence." Hello, darkness, my old friend, etc. And Pythagoras had his thing about the music of the spheres that were really these planets singing or something. And I'm thinking about, do we humans have the capacity to feel or understand presences that we can't, like a dog's frequency is 60,000 hertz, but a human can't hear beyond 20. So, but can we in some way develop an organ of perception that would allow us to sort of see in the dark, hear in the spaces we can't, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I think that may be possible. It all depends on our attention, our focus. The one thing that I can say is, hey, I'm talking about absence and presence, but I'm not talking about Zoom or internet. That's totally different kind of thing. And really, for presence in absence, for that thing to be possible, we have to open up our body to the situation. If we don't do that, there's nothing. So that's my simple answer to your question. Thank you very much.
Yes, question or comment from Fran? Please unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Oh, so sorry. Am I back?
Yes.
As present in absence. I was very struck by the conductor. Frist is his name at the end of your last.
Blomstedt. He's 94 years old.
Yes, yes, very struck because what seemed to be happening. You're saying you have to be open and present. At the end of the piece, he held the space of that presence in absence. He held it, and when he broke it, that was when we knew it had stopped. So there was a way in which he invoked the presence, and maybe if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had that experience.
Right. Right. Typically, this one, other conductors did the same thing pretty much. But this one, he stayed silent for about 20 seconds. So that was really extended. But again, the audience also cooperated. Audience usually exploded right after the symphonies, but they waited. Yes. So that was wonderful environment that this type of presence actually happened. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
John, please unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Good. Yes, I want to make sure that I understand what Bongrai was talking about. It may be possible, to think of silence as what comes before and what comes after a presentation. But would it be accurate to say that that is only one special dimension of silence, the other one being that presentation itself is totally deeply immersed in silence? Are you with me? All right. So someone makes a presentation, and after the presentation, there's a period of silence, and perhaps before the presentation there is silence. What I'm suggesting is that there's another way of situating silence, that is having silence or experiencing silence in the presentation itself. Bongrai, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right, right. Yeah, it's no, there's a passive silence, but
Yeah.
you're talking about you fully immersed.
That's right.
Right,
Yes.
right. Yeah, it's active. It's really fascinating and exciting form of silence. It's a silence, but it really is something out there. It's really showing itself.
Yeah.
And yes, yes.
And perhaps the same thing could happen to language when there is again a presentation in language. When one speaks, finishes speaking, there is silence, and obviously before speaking there is silence. But perhaps again that is one experience of silence. The other experience is that language is pervaded by silence. It cannot be what it is, except being steeped in silence.
Yes, yes, yes. It's very expressive form of silence.
That's right.
Yes, there are certain things language can deliver, but there's also certain things that language delivering things through silence. And that's amazing. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, there are 2 hands up. Let's move quickly to Joanne and to Linda.
Thank you so much for that incredibly fascinating paper with all the wonderful video clips and music clips. I wanted to mention first that I began thinking as you were talking about Sartre's passage early in Being and Nothingness, where he talks about setting up a meeting with a friend of his named Pierre. And he goes to the restaurant and he waits, but there's no Pierre. There's no Pierre. Pierre doesn't show up, but Pierre is there by his absence. Pierre is, the absence of Pierre is an experience that Sartre, or whoever the narrator is having. So he begins thinking through that issue. And then I go to Derrida and his critique of the metaphysics of presence, calling attention to how language functions as a deferring system away from, I don't know how to put it, the objectivity or substantiality. But I think it's getting to some of the same things that you are. And then the final thing I wanted to say is there's a wonderful passage of Foucault when he's giving his, I think it's a discourse on language when he was being initiated into the Collège de France. And he starts the address, it's a public address that he has to give. And he says, I wish I could come in and somehow indicate to you that as I speak, I'm part of a whole system of human discourse. Even though I come to you and I am announced and introduced as an individual, but really when I move into this space, I am taking a place, a kind of instantaneous spot in a history of human discourse. So there's a kind of humility involved in that also. So that to me is it's about presence more than absence, but it's about this same issue of, where do we find the silences? What are the silences, and how can we talk about language in a way that we can value silence, I guess.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you very much.
One more comment or question very rapidly by Linda. We are running out of time, so
thank you. I'll be quick. And Bongrai, thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent as always. I just wanted to mention on the John Cage piece, he's frustrated with the traditional audience, right? And he really wants to open up their minds about music and also about the idea of the fact that, well, actually 2 things, that all sounds are music, right? And that there is, on some level, that there is no such thing as silence in this world. You remember the story where he locks himself into this booth where there's supposed to be no way that sound can enter. And he ends up hearing all these sounds of his own body, his heartbeat, his ears are ringing, all kinds of things are happening. And so in a way, he is in the silence, he is framing these unintended sounds to show people these two things, that all sounds are music, because there are many stray sounds. It's not going to be a vacuous environment when these things are happening. And so on the surface of it, it looks one way. But this made me think also of Goethe, his saying, which is also attributable to a few other people, that architecture is frozen music, right? Because, and it really is true. As a composer who studied composition, I can tell you, music's structure is defined not only by sound, it's defined by sound and silence. You need the silence in order to understand the architectonics of the piece, right?
Right.
So just those things came to mind and I wanted to share them with you. And thank you again for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for your helpful interpretation of John Cage's work. So it's complete science, but actually in the middle of science, you hear many things.
Correct.
Many things from the audience. So yeah.
He was a bit of a philosopher too, John
Right.
Cage. And I think he was really trying to tell these very traditional audience members that, there's another way of thinking about what they call music.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very quickly, I see some resemblance. Are you hearing me, Bengray?
Yes.
I see some resemblance between the use of black and white in your representation of absence and presence with yin yang. I don't know if that's intentional or not. Last more question or comment is maybe a question. You as a presenter and we as listener or consumer of your information, we are all present. What's the difference between your way of being present and our way of being present based upon your distinction between the two modes of presence, presence in presence and presence in absence?
Right. Yes, I'm presenting, but I'm also the audience. You audience is the presenter. So you can see both ways. But the important thing is that to see both ways and to appreciate absence and presence in all the mixture of things is we have to open up. That is important. Otherwise, we just stuck in one side only. And that's when we don't appreciate any kind of presence in absence or absence in presence, I guess. Yeah, that's what's happening. Thank you, Ziki.
Okay, I see some of us are starting yawning. So let's move to the next presentation. Bravo to Bengray, and let's move to Janine, that we already introduced her. So hopefully things work now.
They don't, I'm giving up. I think it's working. Is it working?
Yeah, I see something.
Yay, okay. Oh my God. It's ironic because usually I am the one helping with the technology in person. So I'm sorry that this happened today. So you guys can see my whole screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So presence and absence, transformations of energy in art. When I think about the topic of this conference that leads us to question the nature of presence, I immediately think about the photograph. As so eloquently suggested by Barth in his book Camera Lucida, the photograph is absence as presence. He writes, the photograph then becomes a bizarre medium, a new form of hallucination, false on the level of perception, true on the level of time, a temporal hallucination, so to speak, a modest shared hallucination. On the one hand, it is not there. On the other, but it has indeed been, a mad image chafed by reality. I think too about hours I spent in the darkroom when I was younger, back in the day when you needed a darkroom to make a print, when I would wait for an image to appear like magic on a blank sheet of paper, out of absence, presence. In the book, Barth talks about looking for an image of his mother that is for him true to his memory of her. The one that does this for him is one in which she is a child, which is interesting because he obviously didn't know her as a child. Still, something in the image seems true and captures for him the essence of her. In searching for an image of Roland Barthes, I came across this image of him with his mother, which suggests to me something about their relationship, even though I obviously never knew either of them. In photography, light bounces off a subject or object, and this light energy is then transformed by chemistry into a picture of something or someone that existed at one point in time and continues to exist as a photograph in the present. Images suggest narrative. Here we see Ernest. What a novel. These images of my great-grandparents on the left and my mother as a child on the right are on the wall in my mother's house. The photograph conjures memories of things we have personally known and things that we have not personally known but accept as a kind of truth. I never met my great-grandparents, but I feel that I know them. The photo is like a fossil, or as Barthes says, it is a clock for seeing. For as much as it confirms that something has existed, it also reminds us that a moment of time has been lost forever. The subject or objects in the photo exist for us in the image as a trace of the past, as a trace of light energy and chemical transformation. And this is where I make a connection to the first law of thermodynamics and Einstein. Please remember, I always say this, please remember that I'm an artist who likes to think about science and its connection to art, and not a scientist who has studied the subject extensively. I always apologize for things that I may get wrong. But right or wrong, I love thinking about science because it gives me ideas for making work. Einstein said that energy is neither created or destroyed. It just changes from one form into another. His famous equation E equals mc squared suggests that energy and mass are interchangeable. So what does this mean? With the photograph, first we have the transference of energy that allows the reflected light of a subject via photons to move through the air and interact with a light-sensitive material to produce an image. And then this image has a mass and energy of its own, which then acts upon the viewer. Photographs, all art objects, have mass and energy. In order to think, your body processes food and water and light. And if you think about it, we transform energy all the time just in the process of existing and communicating with one another. I love this image of Picasso where the camera picks up a trace of light as he draws in the air. Artists transform energy into art. Energy transformation is the essence of making art. Art starts with an impression of the world, but then becomes a thought that moves through our minds, and then becomes matter once again in the art object. And that object in turn has its own energy that works on the viewer. So here we have a bunch of famous artists making their work. Little did I realize how much reading Camera Lucida in college for a photo class would affect my understanding of photography. The notion of presence in absence is related to my exploration of the idea of a break boundary in my series Break Boundary, Places Real and Imagined. Break boundary is a term coined by Kenneth Golding that refers to the point in a chemical reaction where one thing turns into something else. In this work, presence and absence becomes instead the ambiguous space between real and imagined. In these, I take images of real places and layer them to create imaginary water and landscapes that are often mistaken for paintings. On the one hand, they're photos of real places, and at the same time, they're not photos, and they are not places that exist. In more recent work, I moved from water to the earth and garden because the garden is also a place of transformation. Oops, these were just a couple extras from that first body. I moved from water to the earth and garden because the garden is also a place of transformation where energy moves through cycles of life and death, where energy and light are recycled endlessly. One might think of nature in terms of presence and absence too, where the hidden genetic makeup of all things is shared and transformed over time. Our DNA does not always manifest itself in traits that can be seen, but it is inscribed in future generations. In these images from The Earth is Intimate, I tried to capture the beauty of things as they transition from ripe to rotten. They are images of my mulch pile. For these, I was influenced by traditional Dutch still life painting, where we see the abundance life has to offer alongside dead animals or skulls that remind us that death is also part of life. These flowers, that are also part of the same series, were made by combining watercolor with photographs. Like the earlier break boundary images, these lie somewhere between real and imagined. They literally include elements of painting and subvert traditional understanding of the images as photographs. With big girls and painted ladies, I allude to the connection between female and flower. And in my later hothouse hybrid series, the images become even more abstract and hybridized. In these, the titles suggest women who are absent in the images. One of the narratives that informs these is the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden, and I'm going to read a poem that I wrote to go with this series. It's called Mula Bandha. Lavender, lemon thyme, wild raspberry, sweet basil, radish, ravishing arugula, my friends all. I am but a delicate flower, timeless, immortal, destined to live and die and live again. The soft, fragrant folds of my petals explode in watermelon, tangerine, strawberry, lemon, lime, and plum, not to mention the velvety green of my long stem and leaves. I'm a big girl, I am, a queen here in the garden, stronger than I look and smarter too. I'll outlast you, perennial conqueror of new territories, my children, immigrants, hybrid strains, defy the boundaries set forth by those who seek to control nature, my nature. I return each spring in regal attire, camouflaged in beauty, but beware, like tangled morning glories that strangle and support as they reach towards the sun, I am rooted and ruthless. My lineage is long, my wisdom that of the ages. I was here in the beginning, witness to she who tasted the apple and learned of the secrets of the universe. So eventually, in the process of working through the first hothouse hybrid images, my garden literally started to grow women. This was one of the first where I used older images to construct a new one and added in silhouettes of women found on the internet. The images that came out of this became hothouse hybrids 2, a second generation of flower female. Mula Bandha, the title for this piece, is a yoga term for root strength. In between the first and the second generation of hothouse hybrids, I had an opportunity to create an installation for Sparklight City at the Columbus Center in downtown Baltimore in 2019. For this installation, I printed the hothouse hybrid images on silk and paper and coated them with fluorescent paint, created a glow-in-the-dark garden where the flowers were meant to reference Alice in Wonderland and expand on the idea that gardening is a metaphor for making art. So it was an installation in this long corridor that kind of rolled around and then led back to this room that I filled with dirt. And there was the sound of audio sounds of my garden at night. I, like many, have been influenced by Cindy Sherman. Her film still series, which are in fact all self-portraits, suggest a type of woman in a type of film narrative. They draw our attention to the way women have been stereotyped in film and objectified by the male gaze. The suggested narrative allows Sherman to be both present in the images and absent at the same time. She is at once herself and someone else. In a similar but different way, my images in the Hothouse Hybrid 2 series also suggest presence and absence in that they are silhouettes of real but anonymous women and also images of flowers. The DNA of the image is a photograph, but elements of watercolor and collage mask its identity as such. The images are both females and flowers, present in one sense and absent in another. The boundary between nature and human is blurred to suggest that we are nature and that the boundary is arbitrary. I also hope to suggest that we're powerful when we realize that we're part of something much larger than just ourselves. These images are meant to reaffirm the female connection to the earth, but they're also a reminder that the earth reclaims all of us. Going back to Einstein, energy can neither be created or destroyed, it just changes form. And I'm going to read a second poem that I wrote for this series. It's called Rapunzel Reimagined. Rooted, radiant, ravishing, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your long hair. Born of the beds, earth-born mother of bees and birds, sister of lavender, friend of slugs and spiders, she dances with the lilies in the light of the full moon. Her gyrations, reverberations groove in cicada time to the beat of darkness. And in the morning, her eyelids sparkle with the dewdrops of a heavy, heavenly sleep. She laughs, and her laughter mingles with birdsong and wind chime. Unseen, the wind gently ruffles the leaves, and she spins like the earth. Her dance continues. She spins a web on the branch. She winds her way up the trellis, attaching herself to everything, attaching everything to everything, one day to the next, one season to another. Rapunzel lets down her long hair, a gossamer net alight with fireflies and stardust. So I started this talk with one book that influenced my way of thinking. And in thinking about presence and absence, energy and making art, I'm going to end with another. Eugene Herrigel's Zen in the Art of Archery was given to me in college as required reading for a dance class. And it contains an excerpt that I still give to photo students because I believe it applies as much to dancing as it does to making art. In the book, he talks about drawing the bow and suggests that one must first practice one's skill until one no longer needs to think about it. Drawing the bow should be like the effortless play of a child or like breathing. He suggests further that one needs to become the bow and the target. This state of being requires one to forget about oneself, to give up being willful and allow energy to flow through oneself and the action. In this way, the self is absent, and yet at the same time, the self becomes present as part of the larger flow of energy in the world. In this state, energy is free to flow. Interest in Zen led to an interest in Taoism, which is similar but a little different. It also stresses effortless action and going with the flow. But the goal of Zen Buddhism is to reach a state of nirvana where you are aware that the world is an illusion. Your consciousness allows you to move towards this state beyond mind and body. In Taoism, consciousness doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the world and you're a part of it. The goal is to recognize this and go with the flow. I connect both of these ways of thinking back to making art and Einstein's idea that energy can neither be created or destroyed, but only changes from one form to another. In thinking about art as the manifestation of energy transformation, I also start to think about the ways technology allows information and ideas to flow as digital bits through invisible conduits and allows us to exist in a space outside our bodies as we are here on Zoom, both present and absent. That is that.
Okay, from here on, I don't know how the organizer plan based upon the time. If they don't mind, we can still have some comments and questions.
Wilson Richard has a comment and question or something.
Okay.
Is given the fact that you're still chair over there, Jeanette, since the last time I saw you, it's pretty amazing to see the progression of your work going back to all of the things that you have created and where you've been developing your ideas. It's like, I guess that you had a little bit more time than you thought you would have when you became chair.
No, but if I didn't make art, I would go crazy, and after the job of chair, they would be putting me away in a cell. So art keeps me sane.
Well, you're doing some really spectacular work, I would say.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Keeps moving along.
That's all. That's all.
See, Linda, ready to say something.
Yes, Janae, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and the lovely artwork. I have been sort of with the group seeing the evolution of your artwork as I have with Franz as well, and it's just such a delight actually to see this, and it's lovely and carries so much meaning. It's very brief what I have to say. The archer and the bow, that relationship, how could it not remind me of, a musician and their instrument, whether it's a violin or whatever. The same kind of thing has to happen there for that energy to project as music in a convincing way. Because there are some that don't get that principle very well. And believe it or not, that of course translates into the music. But when you really get into the art of performance in music, you really do have to have that sense of what you're speaking about with the archer and the bow. You have to have that sense that the energy is flowing through you and through the instrument, not only stopping there, but going on to the audience, the listener. That's just my point. Thank you again.
There's like a thing that happens when you're making work. If you're truly into the process, that is, you lose yourself. And I've never quite been able to name what that is, but I can feel it when it's happening, but I can't really step back and look at it because it's happening, and you can't do that. You just have to let it happen. So it's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you again.
Any more comment? Bongre Sok, Prof.
Okay, so I can speak now. Thank you for the great presentation. I love the artworks. They're very beautiful. They're very nice. I like your idea of energy running through art from the painter, photographer to the audience and coming back to them. And the really insightful idea of Zen, like you being part of it instead of you dominating, you trying to, no, it's not that. You're part of this whole process. That's an amazing idea, Zen. And you really insightfully using Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. Wow, that's amazing. In this particular context, this is not question, just a comment. Then what about E equals ma squared? So energy equals mass multiplied by art squared, not the speed of light. So art is the medium of energy, and it's coming in and coming out, and you're all part of that. Thank you very much.
I love that.
Yes, Fran.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk and the presentation of your work. It's exquisite. And I just want to say that I was so taken with the series of your compost. Is it yes, that progression from, and the idea of taking these things which are detritus often and making them so beautiful for our own awareness, that the sense that it's all beautiful if we just take the time to look. And you show us that through your work. So thank you.
I'm working on another series of mulch piles, but they're all going to be layered, so that's coming.
Aha.
Yes, Robert.
Thank you, Zeke. And Janae, I want to echo this thing about watching the evolution of your own artistic expressions. And what seems to happen There's a technique in planning that a guy at Pennsylvania taught called overlay mapping. And it's a way to put these different overlays of the world together, from transportation to watershed to energy to trees to whatever. And in the process of overlay mapping, you begin to see things differently. And I love how you're taking the different parts, the cutouts, the whatever, and you bring them together. And there's another presence that comes when you do that kind of overlay thing. And when you, with the skill of your eye and your hand, and that you are drawn into this work, like you can't stop and look at it, right? So I'm just curious about how far can you go with this?
You know, okay, so I guess I'm kind of I never stop. So what I decided is that these images of ladies, I decided to do a series of hats, actually. So I'm taking the actual flowers from the glow in dark garden, and I'm creating a series of hats that might become performance hats of some sort. And so, and like I said, I'm layering the mulch piles more to sort of like keep going. But you're right, I've come to this point where I'm just like, should I just stop with this stuff? Stop with the flowers, you know? So we'll see. Everything evolves over time, you know? Thank you guys for putting up with me with my technical difficulties.
You are very, very, very welcome.
Oh, heavens.
Yes, I see Kip. You want to say something?
Yes, great. Loved the presentation. Thank you very much. You and I have talked about gardening before, and one of the things I saw you doing with the theme of, you know, in addition to what you already said about light, right, and you know, with Einstein in the idea of absence and the presence. I thought about how you know, with the mulch pile, but also with the photographs of the different flowers and vegetables, that, you know, the Aristotle's notion of the telos, the nature, right, that that in the seed, right, in the seed itself is this absence, right, that becomes present as it grows, but also at the plant that's mature also evokes an absence, the absence of that rotted pile, right? Without that fertilizer, and the combination of water, which is also, you know, when you water the garden, the water disappears. It was present, now it's absent, but it's in the plant, but it's absent from our sight. So all of that, the decay, the light, right, and the water, combining with the DNA of the seed, if you will, all become an absence that's present, right? Anyway, I just thinking of those things.
Linda's piece was really like water, yes, water.
Water. I will say a quick
Janine,
word, unless
Janine?
somebody else wants to say something. Oh yeah, Sandy.
Janine, I wanted to go back to what you commented on just a little while ago about sometimes when you're working, you're just in the flow. You don't know how, and I always go back to Heidegger, because I think he really had a handle on energy, and he talked about the hammer and the nail, and how we hold that hammer and we hit the nail, and he talks about where does the energy that comes down from the arm let go of the hammer as it hits the nail. And he was amazing to, you know, when he discussed that. And I think of that in what you said, that how we become part of the whole, you know, the completion of the beginning.
Yeah. And it's the circle of energy. I mean, it flows, right? There's energy involved in the hammering, and that energy transforms through the nail something else. And then, you know, it's been a long time since I read Heidegger, but I do remember the hammer.
He was popular for the hammer.
Yeah, I do. I think I was very influenced by the things I read, even if I can't remember exactly what they are at this point. it's like I feel like I need to go back and reread all the books that I read, especially the philosophy ones.
Okay, well, Professor Bongre Silk, I love the subtitle, the Italian subtitle in the video you show, and that's because I spent a lot of time in Italy where I did my higher education training. So it was good for me to see the subtitle in a language that was the language of my education for higher education. Also, because I love that also because, as you may know, the first week of March, we celebrated the National Foreign Language Week, and it was followed immediately by the Semaine de la langue française et de la francophonie. So like 2 consecutive weeks dedicated to languages, and seeing something in the presentation in a foreign language for me was good because that's my hobby. Another thing I wanted to say as a way of finishing my blah, 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 is in addition to Foreign Language Week and Francophonie and good things for education, there is also something ugly going on this month. That is the war, the Putin war in Ukraine. And as you can see, there is nothing beautiful about war because war transforms beauty in ugliness. War is about creating absence in terms of destroying buildings and replacing them with the absence of beautiful buildings. So as we conclude our day, I thought it's worth saying that the ongoing war that we are watching these days is something ugly for our interest in geoaesthetics. I had some more to say, but I will stop there and allow the organizers to have the last word. John?
It's here.
Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. The first thing that I wanted to do is to thank you, for chairing the session. And of course, I thank all the other chairs, for their other, sessions. One of the features of these conferences that I really like is that they are inspirational. Today is not an exception. I really, felt the flow of energy, from everybody. And I hope that everybody felt the energy from everybody else in this, meeting. Tomorrow, again, I want to apologize, for some technical issues we had earlier, but we are in good hands. Andrew, our helper here is very good. Teresa Jenkins, who is also one of the, people who make this conference run technologically, has been extremely, helpful. Now, as you notice, some of us could not log in for this afternoon because there was a switch in the link. That is going to be taken care of, tomorrow, so that we don't, have any, mishaps. All right. But nobody knows exactly what is going to happen unless it has happened. But I want to assure you that we are in good hands. I want to thank everybody, again, for this wonderful, day of this conference. And, tomorrow, I hope it will be equally energetic. There is something in Africa we call ashe, that means energy, from, West Africa. The energy, that animates everything that, is, including, language in itself. So again, please, accept my appreciation. I enjoyed my day, and I hope everybody else, here enjoyed his or her day. All right. In spite of what is going on in some parts of, Europe, aesthetics is always, there, to remind us, that everything in the world is not bleak. There is always, light at the end of the tunnel. I like, France's presentation of, light and darkness, something that has come up in practically every presentation here, silence, speech, silence and sound, and so on. There is this, mixture of lived in the world, that serves us in the world. So again, I wish everybody the best of the remaining of the day, and hopefully we will see each other, tomorrow. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
I wish I
drinking
could
water.
join you tomorrow, but I am going to be Zooming somewhere else. So sorry, very sorry. And these occasions are also opportunities to do some marketing. If you allow me, if you give me 1 second or 30 or 60 seconds, I would like to inform you about my forthcoming book titled Obamanomics and Francisconomics. And subtitle is A Call for Poverty Alleviation, Fairness and Wellness and Welfare. It's supposed to be out this month by Europe Books. So if you see something like that, remember that you saw that guy somewhere on Zoom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.